So if you guys have not registered yet, I think we have that on the next slide. If you have not registered and done the pre-assessment, please do so now. We need that. That's how we keep track of where you are within this. And then also, most importantly, for your ELA credit and everything. So if you've not done this yet, please make sure you've done that. We're going to come to these pre-assessment results a little bit later because some of you guys have not done that, especially in the virtual world. So we wanted to give you guys a chance to do that. We'll come back to that slide later. So the big purpose of this today, and you guys can see this up here, and I'm not going to read that to you, but you can understand that what we're here to do today is to equip you. Because for one thing, within these standards are an instructional shift. This is something that's not happened in about 120 years. Whenever I do this training with my teachers, I tell them that all of us are new teachers. We no longer look at our standards, what we have to teach, because let's just say this out loud, as social studies folks, that's what we've done in the past. We'll look at a standard, and it says technological innovations for 1940 to the present, or whatever it may be, and that's not really even a standard anywhere. And we're looking at that, oh, I know what I have to teach then, that's the atom bomb, and it goes right through, to all these other technologies and that kind of thing. So yeah, maybe, no, we don't do that anymore. Now we have to go deeply into those standards to really not only understand the content, but most importantly to understand the skills, and you're going to see that all day long. Our standards, our social studies standards, are very skill-based because we are going to do the social studies now. You can see in the second component there, it says to prepare district and school leaders to facilitate district. Just as Jennifer and Johnny both have said, there is only one me. My role in this now, once you guys roll this out, will be to come in to do the fine-tuning. There is a huge instructional component to this. There are numerous districts that I have been working with already, looking around the room. Some of you guys are like, Kim, I've seen you all year, and yes, you have. So in this past summer. But the beauty of this is that we're working very hard with the instructional component. When we look at this today, and that's going to be where your teachers need that support. This is why they need you to understand these standards. They need to understand, most importantly, where those standards appear. And by the way, our standards are K-12. As I tell folks, all God's children are assessed now. So we are all accountable. So there's the K-5, and we're going to talk about that in a moment, the 6-8, and the 9-12. Our agenda for today, first we're going to look at the organization of the standards. Then we're going to look at the architecture. The architecture for all the standards are important, but in social studies, super duper important. We have the overviews, of course, the clarifications and the progressions. We're going to be looking at the inquiry practices. You guys are going to be going into some breakout rooms and things like that today. We're going to break down the standards. I think that for me, and I can say this, and there's going to be a couple of teachers that are in the room that came with their districts that are going to give it a big head nod, and that is that we have really got to make sure that our teachers are breaking down the standards. We used to call that deconstruct back in the old days, okay? But now we're talking new, and now we talk about breakdown. You're not going to break down doing it, but it's important to break them down. And then we're going to identify, we're going to get to the point, we're going to talk about those gaps a little bit and everything in instruction, especially with these new standards. So our group norms, as we all know, you guys can read through those. If there's anyone at your table that is, as you look at a norm, just give them a little point and a wink and show them the norm so we can all, I'm joking, so we can all make sure that we're going to be working together as a team, and we're going to. So why is this work important? What we wanted to do, we're doing something a little bit different at KVEC because that's what we do, because we are practitioner focused. And that's one thing where you guys are here today as a team. As you listen to everything, as we go through this, I want you guys to keep in mind, like Jennifer said, you're going to be here as a learner and also as a presenter. So as you look at this, please think of this from the perspective, if I were a first-year teacher, what would I need to know? And that's what I do every time I go into a room. I don't really assume that they're going to know a whole lot because, like I said earlier, everybody is a new teacher with these standards because of the way that they're set up. So I want to take you guys into the first link. So say a small prayer. And of course we're going to do, and I'm going to blow this up a little bit so you guys can see it on the screen. What I want to talk about first, because we have to, make meaning around what we're doing today. And of course for me, because as a teacher, I'm always going to think backward design. So I'm going to first go into, well, where do my kids have to go? Where do they have to, where do they perform and show their skills and knowledge? So we're going to, so this is the blueprint of the assessment for grades 5, 8, and high school. This is obviously from the KDE website. So you can see the top It says all of the standards outlined, and keep that in mind when it says all of the standards, because we have two types in the social studies. All of the standards outlined in the Kentucky Academic Standards for Social Studies are eligible for assessment item development. That's incredibly important. Then we have the second point, number 2 there, and this is one that always kind of gets people's attention. Number 2 says the assessments administered at grade 5, 8, and 11 are grade span. So notice it says grade 5 test will assess kindergarten through grade 5. It's no more grade banded 3-5. It is K-5. And when you see what the standards are for K-3, you're going to understand where we're putting a big emphasis on that today. Then we also, of course, as usual, the 8th grade test is 6-8 and the high school. Now here's something else that we need to look at. Everybody look at the chart at the bottom. So when you look at each of those assessments, for instance, grade 5, and this is something else too that's a little bit new for us, because sometimes when we think about social studies, we think about history. It is no longer a history focus when you look at that practice test. And we're going to look at the practice test in just a moment. For elementary, it's split evenly, all the domains, and when we say domains, we mean all of the domains. Civics, economics, geography, and history, 25% each. Same thing with grade 8, but let's look at high school. There is a very concerted effort here that you guys will notice there's a nice little number 2. Beside 25% in the history component in grade 11. And that is that history for high school will be 50-50, I shouldn't say 50-50, but 12.5 and 12.5 to make up that 25% between world history and U.S. history. It's going to be a very concerted effort and focus to make sure that you are being diligent in both disciplines. But now here's something else. Everybody look at the number 1 directly below the chart. That says inquiry. 50% of the assessment items for each domain will also measure and be aligned to the inquiry practices. It is not specifically a discipline-focused test. Inquiry, and this is why I said a moment ago that all standards are eligible for assessment development. To help you understand that assessment blueprint a little bit better, I created this diagram or this graphic organizer. So it's not only 25% in each domain, as you guys can see over here, inquiry practices are 50%. So now we're going to look at the practice test. So when your teachers go here, and I'm going to highly recommend that your teachers go here. That not only that, they need to go here with their students, because there's many technological skills that your kids are going to have for this, but most importantly, there's just because they're going to have to manipulate this, relatively quickly to be able to take the assessment. Let's look at grade 8. So as we go through this today, we're going to have some table conversations in the virtual rooms. It won't be officially a breakout. It'll just be a moment where you'll talk in the room there with your facilitator, so you guys will be able to look at it. So we're going to look at the grade 8 social studies test. Practice test. So we're going to go ahead and hit that start. So you guys will notice part A, it says part A has 10 questions. We're going to take a moment to look at those. Every now and then I'm going to stop for a discussion. So what you guys will see, look at the first question. Now again, this is another one of those times when you have to start thinking about what skills do my students have to be able to take this test. So we look at this first one here, and it says match each vocabulary term about the U.S. government with its definition. Move one term into each box. So rather than us take the time to really take it, one thing I do with the teachers when I go through this test with this assessment, one thing we also look at is DOK. We're very, very intentional with it, and DOK, remember, is not the verb. This is a discussion I've had numerous times over the past few weeks. DOK is not the verb. DOK is what you do with the content that the verb directs that makes it DOK, okay? This is one of those that's called technologically enhanced items. And I have to put this down to do this. So when you look at the 3 definitions and you see those, you can see, like for instance, where it says the division of power between the U.S. government and state governments. Well, I know that that's federalism. So I'm going to reach up and grab that and move it down to that box, okay? So we can do that for each one of these. We know that the power of each branch of government over other branches is checks and balances, and then the separation of power. Now, let everybody look here. The blue arrow is where they're going to go next. This next one, here's something I want you guys to look at. I'm going to read this question to you guys, and I want you to think about, and this is going to be one of those moments where I have you guys talk as a table. So what I want you to look at when you look at this question is and you can jot this down in your notes as Jennifer gave you the notepad. I want you to look at the skill, the vocabulary, and the content for this question. Skill, vocabulary, content. So this question, and by the way, this is 8th grade. Now, when you look at this, you're like, Kim, that's not an 8th grade topic. No, it's not. It's a 7th grade topic. This is why all standards for every grade span are eligible for the assessment item. So when we look at this, it says, this table identifies sources. Now I'm going to read this slowly, and every now and then, you know me, I'm going to pause. So that's a little hint there as to content, skill, and vocabulary. This table identifies sources that a student has gathered to answer the supporting question, how did increased interaction between Afro-Eurasia and the Americas change the populations of each region during the 16th century? This question we're going to dissect as a group, by the way. Decide whether each source is relevant, not relevant, or not credible for answering the question. Choose one selection for each source. Okay, so let's look first and foremost at vocabulary. What are the things that your students are going to need to know? And by the way, when you look, and this is why I just went to the middle, 5th grade looks like this, 8th grade, of course you're looking at it, then 11th grade is going to look like this. They're going to have all those same skills. So let's look at what is vocabulary that your kids are going to need to have. Okay, they're going to need to understand the concept of relevance in social studies. So make a note of that. What does it mean to be credible and relevant in social studies? Somebody shoot another one out there. What is a supporting question? That's another vocabulary, and we're going to talk about that today. Supporting question is something your kids are going to need to know. What about another? Sources. And when you say the word sources, it should be getting to the point with your students, it's so automatic that in their mind they're thinking, oh, is this a primary or secondary? Oh, I must be going to encounter both. If they're just saying sources. What is another one? Anything else? Okay, let's go on to skill. What is a skill that the student needs to have? You kind of mentioned it when you mentioned in the vocabulary a minute ago. They have to, yes. They have to engage in a self-questioning, which, by the way, it's not self-questioning right off the bat. It's going to be a skill that you very intentionally teach all year long. But they have to be able to look at this and say, okay, I'm going to have to make some decisions here, and here are the questions I use to do that. So in this case, they have to, so we're going to go through and look at each of these to get our answer. So yes, you're right. That's a skill they would need. What's another skill that they're going to need? Let's look at that compelling question, which is, how did increased interaction between Afro-Eurasia and the Americas change the populations of each region during the 16th century? If you did not, under vocabulary, write down Afro-Eurasia, you probably need to, because we cannot assume that our students truly understand what that means. So Afro-Eurasia is going to be one of our vocabularies. The Americas, notice it's a plural, not just America. Americas, that's going to have to be part of theirs, part of their vocabulary. And most importantly, the concept of region in the 16th century. So at 16th century, understanding that, I used to have to tell my students, you have the 16th, and then you subtract 1 to understand what decade it is. I mean, what century it is. So your students would have to understand the concept of the centuries. So let's look at the first one. So I'm going to let you guys do this skill really quickly. We're only going to do this to one other question so that we don't spend a really long time on this. So let's look at the first one, a journal entry entitled How the Potato Changed the World, that discusses the importance of the potato in European diets. Is this relevant, not credible? Yes, it is relevant. I won't click it in there. A map from the 1500s that shows the location of forest in American lands along the Atlantic Ocean. Relevant, not credible. Not relevant. Very good. Sing along. Because it would be nice to know those forests are, but does it really impact understanding the regional effect in terms of increased interaction? No, it just tells you where the forests are. So the last one, obviously, a blog post from 2020, not credible. Your students have to understand, and again, that's, that when you start going into some of those, and I'm not going to answer any of these. So now let me ask you guys this. 30 seconds to talk at your table. How is this dressed? So what instructional shift do you see within this assessment item? So ready, 30 seconds, talk real quick, and I'm counting. So I want to ask you guys, what's some of the content, and we have social studies teachers in the room, what is some of the content that your students are going to need to have to answer this? Geography, a working knowledge especially for this time period, geography, especially geographic reasoning, and also understanding within geography, movement and migration, which is a big concept within that. Anything else they would need to have? Yes, they would have to know what primaries, yes, absolutely. And he just said they would have to understand what primary and secondary sources are and how they're used, absolutely. So I would love it, and it can be someone virtual, so I'm going to throw this out to everybody. It can be one of our virtual rooms. It can be anyone in the room. Someone give me just your reflection from your table. What instructional shift are you already seeing? And we're going to do one more question, but what instructional shift are you already seeing? What could be? So another thing, so like she said, you know, they're developing a hypothesis, or they're thinking about what could be, right? Is that what you said? So we're going to take that term hypothesis, and we're going to use another word in just a second. So thank you for saying that. So let's look at this next one. Now, this is why your students need to practice in this. Most importantly, this is a teaching format even, because you can see here, this is 8th grade. So it says while, now, and again, we have to teach our students to be very intentional with every part of the screen. There is no more just glancing at it and saying, ooh, I'm going to jump in and start answering the question. No, we better get our kids in the habit of reading all parts. So notice in black at the top, it says, while you are analyzing the sources, now already we're looking at a skill, analyzing the sources, and we haven't even gotten to the meat of the question yet. Think about the compelling question. So we're going to go ahead and write down compelling question to our skills, right? We're going to go ahead and write down compelling because it's no longer just a supporting question. So think about the compelling question as interaction between different people and cultures beneficial. So that's going to be our compelling question. Notice the students have an introduction. So you can see this. They have an introduction they have to read. Let's go to source 1. Again, this is a skill. They've got to be able to read each tab. Source 1, while it is considered one source, look at how many components are part of it. There are 3 parts to source 1. Then you have source 2, which is a map with a legend, and of course it's going to be focused on the question. Source 3 is another map. This one shows trade routes, but it also has another excerpt with it. And source 4 is 3 excerpts from the same piece. So that is approximately 7 sources that these 8th graders have to manipulate. 7 to 8 sources that they have to manipulate, source, and process alone to answer the question. So look over here at the question. Analyze each source and then answer the questions that follow. First question is, which 2 geographic features most likely contributed to the movement of people and goods within China during the Song Dynasty? So if they're thinking 2 geographic regions, now I just showed you guys this right off the bat, right off the top of your head, what is the source you would have gone to answer this question? It's right here. It's a 3rd tab, but it's source 2. They're going to have to go to source 2 to answer this question. Now, now, by the way, this does not make it a reading test. This is far from a reading test, because what knowledge of China do your students need to have to answer this question? Now we're back to content. Yeah, it's not kids memorizing a map and putting it back up there, is it? No. But in this case, what you're going to see here, they're going to have to understand that in China, these 2 rivers, the Huanghe and the Yangtze, are very important to them. Here's the 3rd question, or the next question. Select one shaded sentence. This is another one of those technologically enhanced questions. Select one shaded sentence that best provides evidence to support the claim. So here we go, Jennifer. A moment ago, you said hypothesis. Your students must create, or rather develop and support claims. So when we look at this one, it says select one shaded sentence that best provides evidence to support the claim that a population explosion led to urbanization during the Song Dynasty. I'm going to know that my kids have better know what urbanization is. That is a geographic concept, so I want to make sure they understand that. I'm going to make sure that my kids are familiar with some of the top dynasties, especially in terms of, in 7th grade, you're talking about the Tang and the Song, the Han. There's like several dynasties they need to be familiar with. But most importantly, I want to make sure they understand what it means to support that claim. So when our kids look at this part of the question that says, support the claim that a population explosion led to urbanization, So your kids need to understand what leads to a population explosion. The millions of times that you guys have taught Egypt, Mesopotamia, ancient India, ancient China. When you think of ancient India, you may have done Mohenjo-Daro or Harappa. When you think of those places that you have taught, and one of the first things you said was they became very advanced, and because they became advanced, they had more food, and because they had more food, they were healthier. You've taught the concept of a population explosion, but you have to be very intentional with those concepts. In other words, looking at this, now what I want you guys to do, think of what a student has to do here, and now I want you to think of what instruction has to look like in the classroom. Let's take 1 minute. I'm not going to do another, because all of the questions for the rest of this test stem from these sources. So now that you've kind of seen the sources, talk it over, take 1 minute this time, because this is big. What does daily instruction have to look like for your students to be comfortable with this assessment? When you guys look at this one. Read the question carefully, then enter your answer in the space using your knowledge of how physical geography influenced empires in Afro-Eurasia. Evaluate the following claim. Now they, as students, are evaluating another historian's claim using the same sources. So claim, China's physical geography limited interactions between the Song dynasty and the other empires. The next one, construct an argument. So now you've looked at 2 of the essays on here. This one is construct an argument to answer the compelling question, is interaction between people and cultures beneficial? So now you guys can see. So Denny, Paul, what does Pikeville Independent, what do they want to share about this? What instructional shifts do they see within this assessment?
Kim, they said that, first of all, they can see a shift from recall to inquiry. And then Pike County has said the learning target for the day needs to be embedded in the formative assessment. And then Pikeville Independent's answer to the question about how this needs to look from day to day is that daily instruction needs to be more inquiry-based.
Thank you. Hazard Independent, what did you guys say?
Hi, this is kind of along similar lines to what was just said, but I mean, one big takeaway that we had at our table was just, when you're talking about the application and how so much of this is now applied learning, for this to really stick in a meaningful way, we think that you really need to be doing that daily and going through that daily and giving students opportunities to do that and master those skills so that when, it actually comes time to test, they're not stumbling through it, but this is something they're familiar with. They've had time to master it.
The key verb there was master. And Letcher County, Dion, did Letcher County want to share anything?
Yes, Kim, they have shared it in the chat. It says total shift from previous assessment and standards, an emphasis on an inquiry, analyzing sources, and application of content, not recall.
Absolutely. Thank you. Let me lower this down a little bit. Thank you so much. So we've kind of discussed this all along. So so I built in my assessment as we were discussing it to kind of model. If you guys have noticed, a lot of the things I'm doing, you guys are question-based. Notice how hard I'm working. I want you to pay attention to that, because guess what? We should never work harder or more than our kids. It should be all about them, and this assessment is. So all I do is just ask you questions all day long. This is great. Okay. So in this one, this is really what we built up to answering is how do we design instruction and assessment? And you guys have already talked about that. So now this is your cue to go to kystandards.org. You're going to need that at this point. So let me give you a few minutes to go there. And if you have this PowerPoint, which you guys were able to pull that up and follow along, the link is inside the PowerPoint. So now that you guys are here, this is the components of the document. When you work with your teachers, it is incredibly important that you are very intentional about when they have, now I want to say this, this is why you may want to go totally electronic on this. This is a 219-page document, and it's completely in color, and you need that color. So that's going to be pretty intensive to try to copy. So if those teachers can isolate the section that they need, in other words, like if it's grade 3, grade 7, whatever it may be, but they need to see the color because it was very, just keep using that word one more time, very intentional in how we designed the architecture and everything to be addressed by the teachers. So a while ago when I told you that all standards are available, they are eligible for assessment item development, this is where we have to understand. We have two types of standards. That is, we have inquiry practice standards and we have disciplinary strand standards. In the past, we have had a really big focus on disciplinary strands. We're like, we're really teaching and sending home the whole history and doing some geography in there and a little bit of economics, and we made sure we did the civics. But now it's intentional 25% all the way across each domain. But most importantly, 50% of each of those domains is going to be inquiry based. So yes, for those of you that said we have got to make sure that we are inquiry based, you were absolutely correct. So here we go. So questioning that's going to report out on that. Okay, Menifee, tell us the 3 big takeaways for questioning. And you guys, as we're talking about these, highlight in the folder or underline in your hard copy. But let's jot these things down because we remember we're going to empower these teachers. We're going to build their capacity within these standards, and this is so incredibly important. So Menifee County, what are the 3 big takeaways for questioning?
There are 2 types of questions.
2 types of questions.
Compelling and supporting.
Compelling and supporting questions.
Compelling are open-ended, enduring, and unresolved issues.
So open questions, this is the second bullet. Compelling questions are open-ended, enduring, and centered on significant unresolved issues. Compelling are inquiry-based. Supporting questions are content-based. But one thing, if I could, to kind of play with this, compelling and supporting. While supporting questions are content-based, they are still based within the larger concepts. It's not who were the 800 pharaohs of Egypt. It's why why did Egypt have pharaohs? To look at and if anything, really, you would compare, let's say, Egypt and Mesopotamia maybe in terms of leadership positions. So your supporting questions, while it gets into the content, they are still open by nature, so that students have to develop claims to answer those supporting questions. Very good, Menifee. Thank you so much. Thank you. So investigating is Jackson independent. So what did you guys find in investigating?
We found that it was important. It said to use all 3 of the context, concepts, and tools. You had to use all 3 of those. And that inquiry, you must analyze information and develop substantiated conclusions. And then we had a little question at the bottom about the coding, but Kim explained to us that it was just only using the investigating and no other skill, just the investigating. But we did notice when we were reading on that it was a very important skill, that it would be very hard to make conclusions and such if you did not kind of master or really focused on the investigating skill.
Thank you so much. So notice, I like that they brought up the point that it's important. This is when we plug in the concepts, tools, and content. This is when we plug that in. Menifee alluded to that, which is extremely important. And then the big thing is, you guys, you're not going to see a ton of investigating standards because guess what? Every grade just says investigating. And what happens under investigating, that's when you're going to see the 4 domains. So make that note as well. So write that down on that part so you can remember. In investigating is where you will see civics, economics, history, and geography. That's where you'll see it in that part right there. And we have using evidence, my favorite. Using evidence, Leslie County. Grace, I'm going to try to pass this off at a 6-foot distance.
What we said was it's based on logical evidence, but you have to substantiate a claim using that evidence. You have to understand that claim and then support that claim. You're not just knowing content, you've got to apply that content because you have to collect, evaluate, and synthesize evidence from different sources and develop and support that claim using that evidence.
And notice that she said that your students are going to be developing that claim using primary and secondary sources. So now you guys can see how investigating and using evidence are side by side. All right, and communicating conclusions, that will be McGoffin County. So whoever their spokesperson there, they're right here in this table, right there, McGoffin County.
We had communicating conclusions, and we had had a discussion actually before we started with this about our students and this need for them to find the right answer, especially for our 8th grade students, our 11th grade students that have tested for a while. This is moving away from that, and it's more inquiry based, and it's more, one of the samples we looked at asked for them to find the best answer. That doesn't mean that there's only one option. So we thought those conclusions that take into account the opinions of others based on being able to formulate their own conclusion and defend that. And I think that goes back to doing the questioning and doing and getting their own evidence to support their own claims. And also, we talked about using this new form of media to be able to share this and be able to communicate those conclusions as well.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because we all know the old ways, essays, reports, that whole kind of thing. And I really love that you're bringing up the idea that they're going to develop their own claims. You guys, we have to remember, our kids are going to develop claims sometimes that we disagree with. If I looked at you guys and said, if I took a poll with you all right now and shipped it out there and asked you to tell me who was the greatest president that we've ever had in office, if you look at the C-SPAN's poll that was just done about maybe 8-9 months ago, Abraham Lincoln wins almost every time. But I'm going to tell you, there are historians out there who will argue up and down that he is definitely in the bottom 20. While all of us in this room will say, no, he's number 1. I love Abe too, a lot. But anyway, there are historians out there. So we have to realize our students are going to develop claims that we may historically, economically, geographically, whatever, disagree with. But if they support it with evidence, just like you said, if they support it with evidence, it is theirs. It's not ours. It's not our claim. It is their claim. So most importantly, I love also that you brought up the new forms of media. Kids develop, it's a huge, huge thing out there. And I can give you numerous, if you contact me by email, I'll give you some of those websites. Doing podcasts from the classroom is gargantuan. So can you imagine what these students do when they sit down as a group or even as an individual and they're developing their claim? Like let's go back to 6th grade this time. Let's go to 6th grade, and you're looking at Rome and the fall of Rome, and you're going to spend a day or so talking about that and comparing it to another civilization that fell. So let's say you've got this one student who is absolutely just entranced when it comes to anything Roman. My daughter is one of those people, and she's going to kill me for saying her name over the whole region. So anyway, so that student and maybe get another student to work with them, they can develop a podcast. There is a great podcast. This woman tells you how to get your kids to develop a podcast and produce it in 4 days. And that's one of those extended activities. That is a taking action activity, and that is very much part of the IDM model. So the inquiry design model. So the whole idea of the students taking action and produce, and just imagine the knowledge that they will have of the content in doing this. Yes, thanks you guys. Thank you very much. And it's time for a 10-minute break. You guys are thinking, yes, it is. Now that we've looked at the architecture, now that we're beginning of, and we looked at the inquiry practices, 10-minute break. This includes you guys in the virtual world. It's 10:13. See you guys at 10:23. Thank you. We wanted to give you a moment for team planning. So that works perfectly coming from break, giving your brain a moment. We want you to talk at your tables here. How long did we say on that one, Jennifer? Was it 5 minutes? Okay. So we're going to give you guys 5 minutes as you come back from break. And we really want you to start thinking now about how you're going to, so now that you've seen this chunk, what is going to be the best way for you to roll this out with your teachers? We already know, looking at this, especially by the end of the day, considering that this is one of those 6-hour trainings, doing it in 6 hours for your teachers, I would imagine would be a little difficult. And it's better to kind of break that up so they have an opportunity to kind of understand components as they go. But let's take 5 minutes to do that. And we're going to time that, so we'll keep you guys. So let's extend our conversation then. 5 minutes. What is the plan to start rolling this out to your teachers? So what is already, so I would love it if somebody in the room would just kind of share with us, what are you already kind of thinking about? If anybody would just like to throw out one of their ideas that you're problem solving about how bringing this out to the teachers and also getting everyone engaged in that implementation.
We talked about just if we were to like bring it to teach, to everybody else that maybe hadn't used this before, is bringing up the chart. The chart we've all seen, that's got the inquiries and then the discipline strands. But we feel like we would probably need just one whole solid training over nothing but inquiry, because that is so new to, it's new to us as social studies teachers, but, especially people that has never, had one of these trainings. But we feel like that would be a first step, is maybe showing this chart and the breakdown, and then going into further detail in the inquiry based.
Absolutely. That's a great. So if you guys had not made a note of that, I think this moment right now where you guys are sharing out is going to be very important and very powerful for you, because they may say something that you did not think of. So would anyone else like to share? McGoffin, you guys had an idea. Yeah, I called you out. Sorry about that. But I think it's important for folks to hear.
We had talked about incorporating, when we take this back to our teachers in our district, making sure that this was a collaborative process with our reading and language arts teachers, and making sure that it was something that we were being diligent about including them, because they are so closely intertwined, and both of those contents are going to depend on each other to do this successfully. So.
Absolutely. And one thing we talked about is that when reading and writing, when they get a hold of our pieces, so to speak, with that informational text, text has to be discussed from a disciplinary literacy perspective. Like in social studies, we don't say, what is the main idea of this article? We say, what is the author's claim? And what evidence do they use to support that claim? And I have lots of stories about where I tried to do this in the past that I'm not going to share. But thank you all so much. Do any of the virtual folks have anything?
Yes, Kim, Pikeville Independent says they're planning a vertical alignment meeting on January 3rd with all K-12 social studies teachers as far as rollout. And then Pike County is going to do, they're going to break it down into grade levels, K2, 3, 5, 6, 8, and 9, 12.
Oh my gosh, if I had a hold of a good TikTok, and y'all know which one I'm thinking about, when that person like flip-flops all the way down the floor, that would so be me at this very moment. When you said vertical alignment, I mean, like I almost started running in the spirit, so that's great. That's awesome. Okay, so thank you all so much. So that being said, so let's go into the next part, the disciplinary strands, because this is where we get to that. This is that really intentional piece that we used to use a long time ago to death, okay? So the disciplinary strands identified in the CAS, like it says up here, are civics, economics, geography, and history. We know that. But look at the highlighted parts in the next bullet. This is a very big deal. It says in Kentucky, the disciplinary strands in social studies are meant to be taught in unison. There is the days of, I'm going to do my geography unit at the beginning of the year and then jump right in. Those days are gone. I'm going to do my economics unit and then I'm going to teach mercantilism and go into building up to the American Revolution. Now we incorporate those lessons from those units into the inquiry. It's not that you don't do them, you just don't do them all together, because what has to happen is that in order for your students to develop meaning around concepts, they have to immediately be applied. This idea of teaching all these economic terms and then jumping into a unit, doesn't give the students the opportunity to connect to the concept. They're just like, okay, I'm going to memorize all these words and I'm going to take a quiz on them and here's the examples of them. But when they see it in practice, and when they see, most importantly, how it impacts history, how it impacts geography, or how geography for the most part impacts it. When we realize how geography impacts economics, you guys, we live in one of the greatest examples in the world of that. Because of our geography, because of these mountains all around us, think of every job that is in our region. If you want to teach the kids a concept of economics, you have the opportunity to teach Boone in our region. You have the opportunity to teach the development of an industry, talking about the coal towns and that kind of, and building them through. You have the opportunity to talk about downfall. Boy, howdy. You have the opportunity to talk about incentive and infrastructure and all those things that impact economics, and it's in their backyard. So it's not that we're reaching out there and grabbing a hold of stuff. If I have to tell you to teach geography and economics, I would say always take the local road and then build to the bigger national concept, because they'll connect with it much easier. Now that's just a little tidbit. That's my thought, which may or may not work. So, okay. So we have to understand students recall and understand themes and topics better, like it says here, if the strands are integrated. That's the very thing I was talking about. And sometimes this thing wants to work with me and sometimes it doesn't. So here you guys will see on page 15, go to page 15 in your standards. We're going to flip over this really quickly. Page 15 on kystandards.org. Looks into the disciplinary strands. It's so important that your teachers really connect with each of these strands, especially for those of you that are going to be bringing in, like for instance with Pikeville and their K-12 vertical alignment. It's going to be really important that they're very intentional sitting down with these strands and making sure their teachers understand what are the concepts and the things that we talk about in civics, what are the things we talk about in economics, geography, history, that we make, notice in history, it doesn't say memorize the timeline of the Civil War. Notice it doesn't say that. So we have to start really thinking about what our people understand within those. Denny Paul, I saw you pick up a mic, so I'm going to hush for, okay, I got all excited. Thought maybe your folks were going to say something. So let's look at this. So understanding, and we're going to do a little activity with these in just a second. But when you look at the organization of the standards, concepts, and practices, so look at this at the topics within each of these. If it is blue, and this was something I didn't talk about earlier because I was a little nervous when this started, so I kind of zoomed, really quickly over the inquiry practices. So when or the whole architecture when we come back and look at it. In our standards, civics is always blue, economics is yellow, geography is green, and history is purple. Now, obviously, civics is blue because you're thinking red, white, and blue. Yeah. Economics is yellow because it's yellow. Geography is green. I always tell my teachers to think of it in terms of the earth. Seeing all the green, the blue and green on a map. And then history is purple, probably because you couldn't put red on one of these and everybody still be able to read it. But what I want you guys to look at your tables right now, I'm going to give you about 45 seconds to discuss it. Look at the concepts and practices within each. Notice what's in economics. Notice what's in geography. So look very quickly, 45 seconds, talk to your table, look at the concepts that are in this. So notice how in civics, it's civic and political institutions, roles and responsibility of the citizen, civic virtues and democratic principles, processes, rules, and laws. And then you see Kentucky government. We're going to talk about that component. But you guys can see, look under geography. There's 4 main concepts within that. Your students have to understand movement and migration. They have to understand human interactions and interconnections, then the interaction with the human environment, and then geographic reasoning. Geographic reasoning is where you're going to find the use of maps and that kind of thing. So now the other side I want you guys to look on the screen is that let's talk about coding. I don't know about you guys, but before in the old standards, the coding to me was all over the place. There was numbers and letters that sometimes I understood how they went together and sometimes I didn't. This was one thing that the standards writing committee, when they got together to look at this, is they wanted to be very clear about what our standards look like in terms of coding. So it's gotten to the point now, sometimes if teachers tell me, and like for instance, this example up here of the working in civics, and I'm like, which concept and what number is it? So I can go there pretty quickly. So you're always going to start out with your grade. I love this. So if it's going to say now high school, it's just going to say HS. We don't get real creative with that or anything. So so it's K8, then HS. Then the second one tells you the disciplinary strand. So it's going to be C, G, E, or H. And again, in high school, it's going to be UH or WH. Concept and practice, we're going to put it there. And then, of course, it's going to have a standard number, and that's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4. And most of the time, I don't think many of the standards go above maybe a 5. This just kind of outlines, so help your teachers understand. And again, this is why, it may even be like, Lacey, you were talking about that you guys are going to really take one whole day to really understand the inquiry practices. Helping your teachers really understand the concepts and practices within each of the standards is going to help them connect with how do I teach each of these things, each of these domains. That's going to be very important. We won't spend a lot of time there because we're catching up with some time. So understanding how the inquiry standards are coded, this is a little bit different. So notice in the first one, you're always going to have the grade, then you're going to have the discipline, but most important, this is high school specifically, you're going to have I for inquiry, then you're going to have whatever it is, questioning, using evidence, or communicating conclusions in the next to last one, and then you're going to have the point 1. So help your teachers understand how all of this is coded. To understand what this looks like in instruction, this is an example of a kindergarten unit. So this teacher that has sat down and planned this out, this looks like a daily instruction, but this is probably actually going to be over several days. So you can see what he or she have done with, with this. And this is the example actually from the standards document, is that you can see we've got our questioning standard. All learning starts with questioning. And this is something I want you guys to think about. If I had to look at you, so this is why we've got to be so intentional with questioning in our classrooms. If I had to look at you and say, what is something that you had to learn yourself recently? And I want you to think of something in the past week that you had to learn on your own. And I would love it if some brave soul would volunteer theirs, but that's okay. So if you had to think of something that you had to learn, how did you learn it? If you didn't know how to do it, you turned around, you picked up your phone, and what did you do? You typed it in. And not only did you type it into Google, like for instance, for me, I'll always use this example. I was with my mother, and we were alone. It was 10 o'clock at night, took the trash out, came back inside. The lock of the door just fell out on the floor, and we were home alone. And I thought, oh, two defenseless women, unprotected. So how do I fix this? I picked up my phone. I said, how do I put the lock back in the door? That's how I asked it. Notice it started with a questioning word. And, we have to realize all good learning starts with a question. If we walk in and say, guys, today we're going to talk about the Civil War, your kids are not going to connect with that. And we've got to make sure our teachers understand that. If you want to bring them over into the questioning world, get them thinking about how do they learn, and they learn through questions. So that's why you'll see this questioning standard. We've got investigating. Again, remember, investigating is the same standard for every grade. But this is where you plug in, and you can see what this teacher has done. They've plugged in a little bit of each standard from each domain, because remember, we teach in unison, and then we have the using evidence standard that teacher's going to focus on. And in kindergarten, that's pretty simple. And then, of course, you have communicating conclusions, how they're going to communicate that. Now, this is one I wanted to spend a little time and talk about. This is one when I was roaming around, when you guys were having those conversations for team planning. This was something I kept hearing. So let's look at this. When you talk at yes, I've already talked to somebody today about the K-5 thing. So when we think about how each grade is organized according to their theme, you can see here under kindergarten, myself and my community. They already do that. This is why later when we start talking about the gaps and you start looking at these standards, realizing that sometimes they're already teaching it, but they need to teach it in a very concerted, very focused way and make sure they use our standards to teach it. Don't stay within the old standards they used to teach it within. Go to the new standards, and you can still use a lot of those same materials. You're just going to change the way you think into those materials. So that's why you can make this palatable for kindergarten and first grade especially. First grade, don't tell anybody, this is just a secret between us, is one of my top 3 favorite grades, is first grade. Because guess what? It's impact on community and state. It is state. It is all about Kentucky. I love any and every chance I get to talk about Kentucky. So your first grade teachers, like for instance, where it says myself and my community, the civics focus for that for kindergarten is going to be, who's my local leader, my local one, who's the mayor, or your town may not even have a mayor, but it may have a councilman. So guess what? That's what you'll talk about there. And so your focus will be, and it's even the school. The school is also part of that focus. But for first grade, it's all about Kentucky. They're going to know about the governor. I joke sometimes with teachers when I do this training, can you imagine first graders taking on Frankfurt? Woo, I mean, that would be interesting. Let's all do it. No, I'm kidding. So anyway, so here that focus would be Frankfurt. They're going to know about the governor. They're going to know about the lieutenant governor. You're going to take opportunities to talk about how these people impact their daily lives. There's all kinds of, the Kentucky Derby is part of the curriculum because that's an event. That's economic, geographic, everything. Grade 2, North American interactions. I'm going to tell you guys a little secret. This one you may want to jot down so we can start thinking in terms of how to help these people. The teachers, as you start to work with them, I'm going to go ahead and tell you, because these are people I work with a lot. These are the grades that need the most help. 2nd, 3rd, 4th a little smidge, 6th and 7th. Why? 2nd and 3rd, there is nothing out there, or very little, or just some, to help them teach their content. because this class did not even exist 2 years ago. So it's really a process in second and third of bringing materials together for them. Second grade is Canada, United States, and Mexico. They teach those three together. So it's understanding how this whole entire North American continent, Mexico, the United States, and Canada, interact with each other. You know, it's all about government. It's all about trade. It's about that whole kind of thing, making those connections. Third grade is the whole world. But as you can see up here, it says global interactions. Here we're talking about diversity. We're talking about interaction of cultures. There is tremendous opportunity, oh my gosh, in third grade of making this fun and making this interesting. But most importantly, looking at everything through the lens of social studies. Some of this they already do. Like if I'm thinking global interactions, you know, we all think about Cinco de Mayo or Day of the Dead. Like you sometimes see some of your elementary schools doing those. Well, now let's use the social studies standards to really bring those in and really do some, you know, thinking and learning around that. Grade 4, migration and settlement. So basically what happened with 4th and 5th grade, this is the good news for 5th grade, is that their content was cut in half. Half of it went to 4th grade and they got to keep the other half. So migration and settlement, that's getting the Europeans to the Americas, and then everything that happened because they did that. Why did they come here? And what happened because how was it impacted because they came here? Grade 5 is colonization. So it's actually probably starting around the end of the colonies because grade 4 is going to establish the colonies. Grade 5 is going to be all about the colonies and all about the Constitution. When these standards first came out, I had some 5th grade teachers that were very upset. Do I have any 5th grade teachers? I know I've got one 5th grade teacher. Do I have any other 5th? Yes. They were very upset about losing the Civil War and not getting to talk about that anymore and not getting to talk about westward expansion. Everybody was like, oh my gosh, I loved American Progress, that painting, you know, that has the, you know, progress going across the plains. And that they had all their sacred cows, their Grecian urns that they now no longer have. Grade 6. Now, the reason why this is, grade 6 used to be world geography. So it just had a big heavy focus on maps and globes and that kind of, but now grade 6 is ancient to classical civilizations. Notice the time period on this, super duper important. Get your teachers looking into that 3500. So here what you're probably talking about 3500, start with the concept. I know you guys are like, well, I need to really go back and look at hunters and gatherers and things like that. Not really, because you're going to spend some time in a place that's going to take away from the time from your content. It starts with agricultural communities. It's going to start with the idea of all of a sudden we stopped and we stayed in place and we started living. So that's where you're going to start really looking at with 3500 through 600. Then grade 7 is growth and expansions of civilizations. So where you leave off with Greece and Rome, you pick up, as it says here, 600. Now you got to make sure Rome falls, by the way. Rome needs to fall. Byzantine Empire's got to start up. But then you notice that under growth and expansion of civilization, 600 to 1600, this is really going deeper into what's going on in Asia at the time, what's going on in Africa. I mean, I'm not going to go big into detail on all these, I promise. But you'll notice also with 1600, that is about coming to the Americas. It's also up to 1600, talking about what was already going on in the Americas before folks got here. So dissecting the focus of each of these grades with your teachers is so important. And we all know that prime real estate of 8th grade, 1600 to 1877, they get to talk about the fun stuff, all of it. So this is what the standards view looks like for high school. You'll notice here that it's all green because it's all geography. No, they're not just going to do a geography unit, but when they break down their standards and they're going to see what they're going to teach together, this is the opportunity to look at what those standards look like as you start to use those within a unit with the history and the economics and civics. So so here's how the high school is organized. You can see again, we teach in the disciplines. But also I want to emphasize that when you start thinking about your freshman, sophomore, and junior classes, really concentrate on how those are organized in terms of meeting the demands of student skills. So you can see here in U.S. history, 1877 to the present, you see absolutely in the olden days, and I'm one of those people that your high school teachers in 11th grade, 8th grade would go up through 1865. High school picked up at 1865. So they had 3 beautiful, wonderful years in between to forget everything absolutely they could have, so that when they came back, you were thinking, oh, I got to go back and review. I got to go back and start over. And you would spend anywhere from 4 to 6 weeks of review. Now, let's say this out loud. High school teachers in the room. what happened on the other end because you took that time to review? How often did we make it past World War II and deeply past that? So we had to think about, sometimes what happened there. In world history, it's 1300 to the present. Whereas now we no longer share anything at all with 8th grade. Now we have world history that is 1300 to the present. You have 300 years where there is a lap or a shared space. Now, getting your teachers to understand, now these are the components of the individual grade level standards. So you guys can see these. And by the way, disciplinary clarifications for high schools on a whole separate thing. So we're going to go through each one of these components. And when you guys, this is a moment to stop. Like I said earlier, when you guys do the grade bands, the grade spans, giving the teachers, if you give them a hard copy of the standards, to tab so they know where kindergarten is, first grade, second grade, third grade. But it's really nice if they take their grade level standards and make sure once they make that front tab, because all of this is together, and so you don't have to do that with this. So again, you're already at KY standards. So if you guys would, you can take a screenshot of this or you can jot it down, whatever you want to do. But this is in the PowerPoint and you have it in front of you, so you don't really have to do that. So you guys can see here the grade, we're going to go into the overviews first. So what we want you guys to do is to go to your grade band overview by whatever your table is. Now some of your tables are mixed grade, and that's okay. So I'll go back. So go to your grade band overviews. If you are mostly a K-5 table, like back here we do have a K-5 table. So, and then back here we have a high school, so it's, in middle school. So find your grade band. So 25 is the K-5, 96 is the middle school overview, and then 139 is the high school. So when you guys go there, if you guys would just go there, read through that overview. And as you read through your grade band overview, we want you to think about the focus points for each of those grades. Now, when you do this with your teachers, what is in this box on the screen is what you need to do with them, is have them highlight their instructional focus. So you guys can see, especially for K-5 folks, they're going to really need some time to look at this and to talk about it and how their grades are going to interact. For high school, like one table said, it literally tells them the focus of what they teach. Now, notice it's not highlighted anymore. Find the grade that you teach. So for those of you that are teachers in the room, or for those administrators in the room, find that grade that you're probably going to be working with and coaching the most, or that you do a lot of that work, that observations and everything in. Look at that grade so you guys can see this. So identify your grade, write down the page number because I'm getting ready to click. So think of what page you need. For instance, kindergarten is page 26. Yep, there's that time. So ready? So this one, have this one open while we go through and talk about these. We're not going to take a lot of time to divvy this one up because I'm between you guys and lunch, and I want to make sure I work diligently to that. So on the grade-specific overview, look at the question that we're talking to you guys to talk to your teachers about. They have to look, when they look at this grade-specific overview, you have to tell them how might this grade-specific overview be useful for you in your role. You don't know how often I have gone in to work with teachers, and this was very, very early. This was last year, because you guys know our standards were adopted in July 2019. The minute I say the year 2019, we all make that knowing, we all have that little, we share that moment, that little knowing look, because 7 months later, we were in the depths of a pandemic, and we were distance learning. Crisis teaching, whatever you want to call that. So as far as this rollout, and we were just this close to really getting people working within those standards. And then we had to start thinking about how to survive and how to keep our kids, at least hopefully on grade level, so the remainder of that, then the next year was virtual practically. So not a lot of time to devote that attention to implementing new standards, especially inquiry-based standards. So now we're here. But I mean, how often have I gone in to work with teachers that have already started planning lessons, and there was always this missing component for me, because sometimes it would just have a very specific focus, and again, it would kind of go back to the economics or geography or whatever it may be. And I said, well, how is this dealing with your theme for your grade? They had not read this opening paragraph. This opening paragraph is almost gospel for these teachers. So please take a moment to read your grade-specific overview, just the opening paragraph there, and think about how you can help your teachers understand that. So you've looked over that. So I'm going to ask you guys, so if anybody would like to talk very briefly, if anybody would like to, and that includes the virtual rooms. So how would understanding this grade-specific overview, how would that be useful to the teacher?
It tells you the big overview, but we're high school, and so instead of the overview at the top, you have to go down and look at the discipline introductions. So it tells you specifically for civic standards, economic, geography, U.S. history and world history, and it tells you specifically for that specific subject what you need to know, what your students need to know.
Absolutely. So you guys can see, like I was talking to Hazard over here, talking about, where your teachers, in this, especially you can see now how it's going to be incredibly important to do that alignment between 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. It's very important that they each know what the other's doing. It's no more of this, like, used to this, the 6th grade shut the door because it was world geography. They were going to use maps and globes and that whole kind of thing. And then you went into 7th grade, which was, I think if olden days reminds me, that went from basically the beginning of man all the way through medieval period. And then it stopped at medieval or maybe Renaissance. So, so now it really breaks that down and tells them where they need to be. So help those teachers to connect with that. What I did with this 4th grade example, you all can just look at it. What I also do with my teachers when I work with them is I help them take their grade specific overview and I help them break it down according to. So you can see that for 4th grade, their big focus is focusing on why and how people move from one place to another. Very simple concept. So they move from one place to another. They look at the study of migration and settlement, especially of North America. So they've got 2 blue standards. They're going to, or 2 blue concepts that they teach within civics. Describe diverse forms of self-government and assess the ability of various forms of government to foster civic virtues. So in other words, they're going to look at when these different groups come over, like for instance, when the Spanish come over and establish themselves, their form of government looks very different from the French, which looks very different from the British. Then you're looking at describe and evaluate the relationship between resource availability, opportunity costs, migration, and settlement. Very targeted concept in economics. Green, that's looking at cultural, and then of course you have your purple, explain examples of conflict and collaboration. That means as you go through, instead of just doing, the march through history, this group did this group did this group did, talk about how did these groups interact? When did they have conflicts? When did they collaborate? Always use that as the focus. So now let's look at the next part. This is one that's really that teachers enjoy whenever I guide them through this. So look at the next segment. The rest of this, we're just going to walk through it. It says, how will the looking back, looking ahead progression snapshots be helpful? So this again goes back to almost like the grade span overview. So now when your 7th grade teacher's looking at this, because this is a 7th grade one, looking back, seeing what they did in 6th grade, looking forward, look what they're going to have to do in 8th grade. So helping teachers connect with that. And what does this look like in practice? So I noticed that we've got something in the chat there if anybody needs to yell out for us or anything. If somebody posted something. So how would this look like in practice? This section, give this one a little star. Make a note in your notes about this one. This is one that is especially important for K-4 because they've not had a lot of experiences with social studies, but most importantly, they haven't had a lot of experiences with inquiry within social studies. They need to know what these standards look like in practice. Like here's with 2nd grade. What does asking compelling questions about communities found in North America, what does that look like in terms of questioning? What does, down here with the civics and the history, what do these look like? What are some of those focuses? Come down here with using evidence. So what can you get the kids to do within that? So really giving, I would give your teachers at least 2 or 3 minutes to process that section of their standards because that's in the next one. So scroll on down. And then, of course, in the last one, opportunities for cross-disciplinary MacGuffin. This was the very thing that you were talking about a minute ago. And look, there is direction within our standards document for you guys to do that. You were already thinking of that, those opportunities for cross-disciplinary. There are times very much, like for instance, if I were 7th grade teaching the Black Death, I would definitely pull in whoever it is that teaches science and health. I would pull them in. I would say, guess what we're looking at? Can you talk about viruses? Of course, I just dawned on me, oh my gosh, we're experiencing a virus. So anyway, but pulling those people in and saying, let's look at this. Let's look at the Black Death. But Black Death is more bacterial. So maybe that science teacher can compare bacterial and viral epidemics or whatever it may be. Now, what we want to do is give you guys a moment to do a little bit more team planning. So get that document out that you started a moment ago. So let's take about 3 or 4 minutes here. And now that you've seen all of this, how are we going to bring this layer in to your districts? Let's talk really quickly. How are you taking this back so far? What are your takeaways to give away to your teachers? Maybe that's probably not a good verb, but let's talk about this a little bit. So what are you already thinking about how you're going to share this with your teachers? You notice how we're focused on certain parts. So now we've gone over that, talking about the breakdown of the grade-specific bands and the grade-specific overviews. How are you going to get your teachers engaged in this part of the document?
I was just going to say that part of this is going to be relating to all of our folks in earlier grades and non-social studies classrooms, that the assessment that these teachers are planning for and they have to get kids prepared for is really a thinking assessment. It's a processing, it's a thinking assessment that has to go back, and it has to be progressional from kindergarten, first, second, and third. I think that focus on vocabulary, I think that focus on teaching kids to be able to persevere and go through productive struggle, because they're hitting things. It's like a brick wall. And if they don't, the days of read the chapter, do the questions, or do the Mickey Mouse test, and that's easy enough for them to figure out. The days of spoon feeding kids are over, and your science people have already had a dose of that for quite a time, because they saw the science test change several years ago. Social studies is seeing that now, and I told you during the break, and I clarified so you wouldn't get mad at me. But although this is not a reading test, it is an assessment that requires comprehension.
It's a reading intensive test.
Yes, and if you don't have kids that, to me, that's your buy-in from your K1, 2, 3, 4. You say, there's a great deal of reading comprehension and processing that are needed. Those skills are needed for this assessment, and those things they're not niche to 5th grade, 8th grade, or 11th grade. They're everywhere. And I think that probably just convincing people of that, making them aware of that, and then trying to find a plan to build in that progression so that everybody knows what role that they're playing, and whether they're a speech communications teacher or a health teacher or any number of different classes, that they can still be looking at those inquiry skills, those processing skills that are needed for this and other assessments.
That's yes. Amen and yes. And I think one thing, he brought up a couple of things I really want to mention here. I want you guys to, I think for the first time, and for those of us that naturally love social studies and teach it, this is a chance for us to look at that. And that is, we know the value of our subject. We know why it's important, but we've got to convince others of why it is. And for the first time, there is a scope and a sequence to our subject now, to our discipline, that is going to allow everyone to see the value of. I love how Dustin brought up, bringing in those health teachers. Like I said a moment ago, talking to those health and science teachers when you're talking about something, because the reality is our kids may graduate from high school to go on to college, or they may not. But whatever they do, they may never do a job that's intensive in science or in math or whatever it may be. They may not be an author, but they sure do need to read. But here's the other side, you guys. They do graduate to be citizens. And for the first time ever, and that's economic citizens, that is political citizens. That's, those two right off the top of my head are like huge, politics and economics, that we've got to prepare our kids for. And and these standards, if you guys will notice, I'm going to go back to the grade specific overview very quickly for you guys to see this. Look at the very first sentence of the grade-specific overview. I can't move the whole thing, but it says the goal of social studies education is for students to develop thinking and decision-making skills, but it basically goes on to say so they can participate in a democratic society. That is the goal of social studies. Now, it's not the goal of memorizing. It's not the whole goal for them to be able to be on Jeopardy and be super-duper, successful. That's not the goal. It's the goal to graduate citizens. Oops, so I'm going to steal my thunder there. The other component to this is the reading and writing standards. They are intrinsic to what we do, but here's the thing. And I've got a teacher in another district, and I'll look at that district in a week. She teaches 3rd grade, and she was talking to me the other day about how she's brought culture into her 3rd grade, and the kids are digging it. So now they're doing Christmas around the world, but it's no more of this Christmas around the world. We're going to have a stocking. No, her kids came to her and said, oh, so we need to talk about the music and the dress of the people, right? And she's like, yes, you do. And she starts naming all these things, and the kids are the ones naming it. And they're so connected that she said these projects are exponentially more rigorous than anything she's ever done. But my favorite part, and I've got chills saying this, you'll see a Firecast about this soon. She said when she goes from reading to social studies, the kids do not know when the transition happened. They do not recognize it. And this is something, again, keep talking about McGoffin County over there. McGoffin County, you talked about it, bringing in that reading and writing component, connecting it. It's going to happen, and it's going to happen very intentionally. But when she said they don't recognize when we go from one subject to the other, they shouldn't, because our world's not like that, is it? So why should our classrooms be that way? So think about that, and in terms of what our kids are doing. So is there anything else that anybody wants to bring up that you want to share for the good of the group? Any of our virtual folks, Menifee, anybody, Letcher, Owsley. I'll start naming them all.
Kim, Pike County said that they are going to have their teachers work in grade level PLCs to break apart the grade specific overviews and to take a look at how that is going to look in the classroom as far as practice is concerned. They would do the same with the high school, but they will have them in a whole group rather than grade specific.
Absolutely. So now you guys will notice in your participant folder, you will see another folder that says Jamboards, right? It says Concepts and Practices Jamboards. So we'd like for you to click on that. I'll give you a second to do that. So go into your participant folder, then go into Concepts and Practices Jamboard. Got a little activity for you guys to do now. Those of you in the virtual world, you all can do that together too. You can just do it in your breakout rooms. I mean, not your breakout rooms, but in your virtual rooms. And you can do that together. Or actually, in the virtual rooms, you guys are at your different districts. Just do it as your district. Don't do it as the virtual room. Do it as the district. You guys will see that your district has a Jamboard in their name. You guys will open that up. And for those of you that have worked in Jamboards, I'm going to tell you this. So what you're going to do, and so you can go back to page 16 and 17 in the standards. You can cheat a little because we're doing this real quick before we go to lunch. But we want you to manipulate those Post-it notes on the Jamboard to where you organize all the concepts and practices within their discipline. Okay? You're going to organize all the concepts and practices into their specific disciplines. Oh, it's view only? Hey, Jennifer's all, listen, speak but the word. Jennifer's all over it, man. Yeah, she's going to change each one. So I tell you what, let's talk for a minute. Let's talk for a second. So are there questions now that you guys have looked at all of this? And listen, I'll give you some of my secrets of the trade. I mean, because guess what, you guys? You're going out and sharing the wealth. What are questions that you have now yourself that after we've gone through all of this? So the concepts and practices, so you guys see under civics, it should have the civic and political institutions, roles and responsibilities. You guys can kind of scroll. This is the place to check you and to check me at the same time. So we're just looking for these things. One thing you guys will notice, and we'll talk about in a second, is that there's a Kentucky strand, as they call it, that goes all the way across. And I think we have lunch. Is it almost lunch? 12 o'clock? Okay. Oh, good. Whew, I was afraid that I'm going to have to fly. So you guys can see how location and place is something you would talk about in a couple of those, but especially in geography. Questioning, by the way, is even though that's an inquiry practice that applies to all of those. So that's one reason why I kind of put it in the middle to kind of talk about it that way. What's something else that you put inside the distractors? Or that you see in the answer key inside the distractors? 3 branches of government, absolutely. Well, location and place, supply and demand, cost and benefits, because you would talk about those within one of the concepts and practices. Is there anything else that you notice that would go there? Okay, so this is a really important activity to kind of get your teachers to see, because for one thing, what's going to happen is that sometimes, kind of like some of you all did, you tried to put some topics that you would talk about or you would teach inside the concepts and practices. We have to be very intentional with how we approach the concepts and practices because those are broader. So when you start breaking it down and you start pulling that in there, that's, we've got to make sure that we're looking at this and we're looking at it in the correct way. So here's one of my favorite parts of the document. Let me go ahead and present. So following this up, because like I said, we've got about 26 minutes before, actually 30 minutes before lunch now. So when we look at the disciplinary clarifications, this is at the very end. Now, this is another part of the document that it takes a while for teachers to realize is there, but it's an incredibly, incredibly powerful tool for our teachers. So and we're going to use it extensively this afternoon looking at deconstruct. So go to the end of a section of grade standards. Like, for instance, if you're working in first grade, go scroll down to the end of first grade. Or if you're working, now we'll tell you high school. If you are high school, and I'm going to put this up here so you guys can see this. I thought I had put it on the, nope. Let me go back one. High school teachers, or those of you administrators working with high schools, go to kystandards.org and go to explore your resources. And when you go there and you go under the social studies resources, you will see the disciplinary clarification document. It's a whole separate document by itself. Download that onto your computer. Okay, so let's go to our questions. I said, you know, why do you think that what you guys were learning around this is, you know, why is this part of the document so important? Why do you need to connect your teachers to it? So when you look at the disciplinary clarifications, and this can be any group that wants to talk to us about it, why is it going to be important that you really connect your teachers to this part of the document?
It gives you a lot of sample ideas of your content and shows you what the expectation for that standard is. So you can get a glimpse of that.
Absolutely. Now, why must we connect our teachers to this document, part of the document? That's exactly what it is. It gives you curriculum ideas or curriculum specifics on what to teach within this document, but within your standards, but most importantly, why do our teachers need this part? It gives them something to go by. It's opportunities, most importantly, and you guys will see it. Look at the second question here. When engaging with the disciplinary clarifications, what must you consider when developing curriculum? Remember what Jennifer said earlier? Curriculum is a local issue. Not only as you start looking at curriculum, and I know many of you guys are, as you start looking at it, there's also within the standards resources on KDE, when you go to KY Standards and it says your standards resources, you go into that, then you go into social studies. There's also a document in there that you can use to look at resources to make sure they align to the social studies standards. So you even have a document that takes you through that. So all of these are going to be incredibly, I keep hitting every button in the world. Like I said a minute ago, you guys, right here, there, okay, it's going the wrong way. There we go. The Kentucky Strand, you guys will see, I think the only grade that does not make a really big connection to the Kentucky Strand is 7th grade. 6th grade does, because there is Greek and Roman architecture in the capital. But as far as really content and that kind of thing, and connecting to the Kentucky Strand, 7th grade has a little bit of a buy in that. But 8th grade, tons. Yes, sir. But wait, let's ask the question on mic. I'm so sorry. Not my rules.
I just want to make sure that that I get my mind wrapped around this. Whoever is making the assessment, the state assessments, they are looking at the clarifications, not just the standards, correct?
I would imagine when they're looking at the document, the standards document.
Okay, because that would concern me. I mean, you know what I'm saying?
Right.
I just was just curious about that.
I cannot speak to that because I'm not a DAC. I'm not the DAC, rather, you know, and nor am I a DAC. But so that would probably be a really, really good question. Seriously. That would be a Rhonda Sims. Yes. Uh-huh. Everybody is invited to that. Yeah. Oh, I'm so sorry. So, let me take this. Rhonda Sims is actually going to let Jennifer talk. That would be better. Yeah, we can. I wonder why.
So, Thursday at 10 a.m. At our combined, this month we're combining principal and instructional supervisor and DAC and professional learning coordinators all into one network meeting because of the fact that we're having them as presenters. At 10 a.m. we'll have Rhonda Sims and Jennifer Stafford with us going over the changes and the current status of the assessment and accountability system. So as you have questions about the social studies assessment, if you want to send them to me, I can go ahead ahead and have Rhonda and Jennifer be prepared to answer those questions, or if things happen on the fly and you want to ask them that day, you will be able to. It will be a Zoom meeting because we know getting you out of your buildings is hard right now. So if you have not received the Zoom link to that and you wish to attend, send me an email. I'm jennifer.carroll@wolf.kyschools.us, and I will send you the link. But this is going to be a great opportunity before the holidays, before we come back for second semester, to get all of those questions that you have about the upcoming assessment and accountability system, test, accountability weights and percentages, all that good stuff. A time to get all those questions answered. So good question, Dustin.
Great question. So that played perfectly into everything. So you guys can see, like, for instance, here, there's going to be tons of Kentucky Strand in first grade. So you guys can kind of see. So like it says up here, what are the advantages of studying Kentucky throughout the K-12 progression? And how does a more sophisticated understanding of Kentucky allow students to better understand self, others, and the world? So I think this is something, I mean, how many times have you guys heard people say, kids don't study Kentucky anymore? I hate that. Kids don't know a thing about our state. And guess what? Now they don't have that excuse. Now it is very much a part of our standards. And so we have a framework for that. So here's what I want you guys to talk. So we're going to look at these two questions as we go through this next section. And you guys are getting ready to do a little in-table activity again. So why are there progressions of learning in the CAS? You guys have already alluded to those today. And how do we ensure all students have consistent access to this? For me, other than the inquiry practices, and that's something that Lacey brought up earlier, not only are the inquiry practices super duper important to make sure our teachers are very adept at those, that we really give them the support that they need to implement those, and most importantly, grow, because time's important. I think the progressions are another big connection. So here's what I'd like for you guys to do at your tables. Take 1 minute and complete this sentence. A learning progression is like blank because blank. 1 minute. Go for it. Finish that at your table, and somebody write it down. So to understand that, when you guys look at the inquiry practice progression, you guys will understand, especially when you look at the questioning, investigating, using evidence, and communicating conclusion. The questioning, using evidence, and communicating conclusions part of the document. The learning progressions really gives you an idea of how those skills change. And since you guys are there, I wanted to take a moment. So this is a conversation that we have been talking around all day. A couple of tables you guys have specifically said. One table said, we've absolutely got to get our K-3 people on board. That's been said to me at a couple of different tables. So this is so I wanted to bring this up here to you guys to give you an idea of why, yes, you're absolutely correct. Everybody look at, now this is just using evidence. This is this is the thing that students actually have to be able to do in your classroom. When you guys looked at that assessment earlier, you guys kept the practice assessment. You guys kept talking about how students were using evidence. Students had to know this. Students had to be able to do this. Well, this is the part of the document that really addresses that. I want everyone to look. Kindergarten, they're going to identify information from 2 or more sources to investigate. That's great. They're also going to construct responses to compelling questions about oneself and one's community. Then we look at, first grade, very similar, identify information from 2 or more sources. By the way, those sources are sources, primary and secondary, and we all know secondary can come from those reading and writing standards. But look at what happens in grade 2. If you're not looking at the document, you want to look at the screen, feel free to do that. Look at what happens in grade 2. This is why I said a while ago, for me, when I work with these teachers, hinge years, which means those years that a whole lot happens and it pushes the kids into the next grade, second grade is one of those hinge years. So look at this. They have to identify characteristics of primary and secondary sources. Second grade. Determine whether the evidence in primary and secondary sources is fact or opinion. Your students at this point now are determining in second grade credibility. They are looking at the concept of, is this something you can trust or not? Now look at using evidence 3. By the way, this is the only grade in all of the standards document that has 4 using evidence standards. 8th grade only has 3, and you know how big it is. Using evidence standard 3, identify primary and secondary source and explain, get this, who created it, when they created it, where, and why. That, my friends, is sourcing a document. You could ask any 5th grade and above teacher in this room, and they will tell you that this is sourcing a document. I'll be honest with you guys. I didn't really, you know, I went to high school in the dark age. You can look at me and see that. And I'm telling you, I never did this in high school. So now we're asking second. I love it. Okay. I got people giving me the church nod and the, you know, whole kind of thing. So absolutely. Look at 4, construct responses to compelling and supporting questions using reasoning, examples, and details about the diversity of communities in North America. This is huge. 2nd grade is huge. That's why I said this is another one of those hinge years. 4th grade is another one because it's big kids school for real. That's when they really move into those progressions. So on page 164, now you have a chance to look at the disciplinary strand. So go up to 164. Now let me ask you guys this. Let's go back to the using evidence progressions. Now that you guys have looked at this, talk for a few seconds at your tables. Now that you've seen this, say, oh my gosh, this is what I want to tell our teachers when we go back. Like you guys have talked about all day, and we can look at this. So the guiding principles of progressions is this. It's based on and refined by, like it says up here, research. And if you'll look at our standards are very much research-based, very much. Part of the, I was part of that, the standards writing committee, and there was, it took a long time. It was in-depth. Most importantly, there was so much research and so many, most importantly, practice-oriented frameworks and everything that really informed that work. So it's, very much research-based. The key components are the essence of social studies, but most importantly, the last one for me, it really says a whole lot. It may not be linear, but it articulates movement toward an increased understanding. When you looked up here and you looked at the kindergarten stuff, it looked really simple initially, but you have to remember K3 is foundational. They're not, and especially when you start looking at DOK with elementary, it's going to be very foundational. So what we wanted you guys to do was to take a moment to really, because we think that this is going to be very important that you guys do, because the second part has really gone more into the standards document, but most importantly, in understanding the content and the concepts and practices that go in behind these standards. So what we want you guys to do is to think about, we want you to answer this reflection as a team. We're going to give you 3 minutes. So how do the K-8 themes support learning progressions? So go back into those themes that we looked at a while ago. How do the inquiry practices, disciplinary strands, and disciplinary concepts and practices support learning progression? So, we're gonna mix this up and ask you guys to report out on this. How might the progressions be useful for vertical alignment? There we go, Pikeville. You guys have already talked about that. So question number 3 is kind of like your alls. And in PLCs, and I think McGoffin was looking at that a minute ago. And where might you need additional support? So in other words, this is informing your team planning. So look at these questions. We want to give you 5 minutes in this part of the document because this is where you're going to do team planning. If you need to stand up, because we've been sitting for a real long time, I know you can smell lunch. We're going to be there any minute now. So if you guys would take 5 minutes, you guys can see up here there are 4 questions, but these questions are going to inform your team planning. So ready? Go. Talk this up, write some answers and some plans around each one of these. Because this is a lot. This is a lot of stuff to take in. Even some of those districts I've worked with, more in the past semester are having to do a whole lot of thinking because now they're looking at it from a different perspective. So we want to make sure that we really support you guys in that. And so that being said, these 4 questions, the next slide says team building, but these questions right here are really the team building moment, okay? So going back to these 4, I read these off to you guys before lunch. But what we're asking you guys to do with this is when you look at the first one, really look at those K-8 themes. Like, for instance, I've talked to several districts during lunch who are really thinking about how they're going to support especially their K-5 teachers because this is a very different world for them. And always, everything that you do it through the lens of how are we going to take this to these teachers. So when you're looking at number 1, think of those K-8 themes in terms of your teachers and how you're going to support their understanding of the learning progressions. How do the inquiry practices, discipline strands, and disciplinary concepts and practices support learning in the progressions? Because all of this is going to inform your team building on the next slide. Then we have how might the progressions be useful for vertical alignment? Again, talk to one of the districts just now, and they were already thinking about the PLC format. And where might you need additional support? That is where I come in. And those of us here at KVEC, anything that we can do, the CRISA team, anything we can do to secure your understanding and to really get you guys rolling this stuff out, we're here for that. So look at these. Like I told you, we did about a minute before lunch, but let's face it, you ate lunch and you needed that break. That 1 hour was most needed. It gave your brain time to really attach to some of this learning that you've done now to get through the carbs, because I too had copious amounts of mashed potatoes. What we want you guys to do is to think into this. So let's take that about 4 minutes, look at these 4 questions, and we're going to go ahead and blend that in with the team planning. So looking at these 4 questions, which won't take you long at all to look at each of these, then we want to give you time to start thinking about how is all of this, how are you going to take the learning progressions into your schools, into your teachers. So ready? 4 minutes and go. Go to slide 24 in the PowerPoint that actually, and this is good for the virtual folks, that actually looks at the themes in the K-8 classes, okay? So you're looking at the themes in the K-8. So as you help them understand their learning progressions, think about how you've got to make sure your kindergarten teachers are teaching myself and my community, because that will feed first grade, which then talks about my community and my state, which then feeds into second grade, which is North America, which feeds into third grade, which is global interactions. So think of the progression in terms of the themes also. How are you going to support those teachers? Like, for instance, our high school teachers, and I say that because I have 2 different groups that are high schools, and I'll give you guys one more minute on that when you go through and look at it. So you have to start thinking about why 6th, 7th, and 8th grade is so important to the high school. So think in terms of that, and let me give you guys just a couple more minutes because there were some questions about number 1. Sorry about that. I gave you 1 more minute to kind of talk about that one a little bit. That is the one that, as you guys start to work in this, is going to look a little bit different. And as you guys need help or support with that, I'm happy to do that. It's still not wanting to work, Tanner. This is still not, okay. I'll keep going. So the next slide says team planning, but we don't need that now. So we're going to go on to, keep going. Oh, is it working now? Okay, try it now. Awesome. So we're going to look at breaking down the standards. Go back into the participant folder, and you guys are going to see a document there, but we don't need it just yet. So what we want you guys to do is to do a reflection at your table. This is kind of like a warm-up that we're going to do. So what does it mean to unpack standards, brainstorm reasons to unpack? Then we want to get you guys thinking about how our teachers packing the standards back for instruction and assessment. This one is big because the next component that we're working on with the standards is the thing that whenever I work with large groups of teachers, and I've got like Knott County right here in front of me right now that can testify to this, when you do this part with teachers, this is what changes their instruction. It really does. This is that arch, that bridge that you need for them to understand the architecture, the organization of the standards and the inquiry practices, and what instruction looks like. So this is the bridge. So that being said, think about what does it mean to unpack, brainstorm reasons to unpack, and then how are teachers packing the standards back for instruction and assessment. Ready? Take 2 minutes. So we're ready to get back into this. So what does it mean to unpack the standards? And we'll take this from virtual and in-room. So what does it mean to unpack the standards or unpack standards? And Johnny's running around with the microphone because you have to speak into the microphone. So what does it mean to unpack? Okay, wait. You forgot that was there, didn't you?
I did. It just kind of means to literally look at each single word of the standard and break apart each single word and to know, okay, I have to teach what this thing is and this thing is. Sometimes there might be 5 or 6 things in one standard. And so it's just, I guess, to me, the idea of taking each single word and looking at it individually.
Because sometimes there's even like one big word. Like, for instance, for us in social studies, when you talk about the concept of rule of law is very complicated because that applies to multiple offices and that whole kind of thing. So then you have to understand those concepts within that. So yeah, when you unpack, and then not only that, when you unpack every word, some of those words have multiple meanings. So you have to look at the rest of the standard, which then takes us to brainstorm reasons to unpack. So for me, when we're unpacking, like, let's say, for instance, rule of law, I have to look to the whole intent of the standard, because if I'm not, because I could really go down a rabbit hole with that one. And I'm getting head nods from high school teachers because they know what I'm talking about. So we have to really look at the intent of that standard. Look at the what now? The clarifications, absolutely. And that's one thing that you're going to see in just a second. And that's why Knott County is aware of this. You not only look at the standard, but then you have to take that next step into the clarifications, the disciplinary clarifications, because that's really going to inform what you need to do. And then the verb is everything, but not because it's DOK, but because it's going to lead you to the DOK. So how are teachers packing the standards back for instruction and assessment? So when you guys talked about that, what are you thinking about in terms of what your teachers are doing with the last step there? And we're going to ask you to say that one more time.
I said we have to build the assessments as we unpack, because everything instructionally will feed toward that. Teachers aren't going to get together and create really good, competent assessments that are rigorous and standards based, and then not teach toward them. Mm-hmm. I mean, so I think that's part of it, is the assessment pieces. I think there's a tendency to go, this is the standard, and then this is what we're going to do. They want to look at the activity. They want to look at what are we going to do. But you have to have, where are we going to go with the standard, and then you figure out what you're going to do along the way to get there.
Because you do that going on a trip, don't you? Like, how much money you have to spend on your vacation and that whole kind of thing, right? And you do all this wonderful planning, and you know where you're going to go, and you design that first. And then you come back and you plan the stops along the way, or how you're going to travel, if you want to some kind of analogy to that. But, absolutely, all too often, especially for those of us in the upper grades, middle and high school, we look at a standard and we know the time period, like I talked about this morning. We know the time period. We know basically the concepts are in it, so we're ready to go. But in reality, we need to unpack that standard to the full intent. And like you said, plan that measurement. How are we going to, because for us, especially in Kentucky, where we are dual aligned, looking at those opportunities to align the increased standards with the disciplinary standards. Like, for instance, if you've got your kids looking at the Boston Tea Party or the Boston Massacre, let's say Boston Massacre and Lexington and Concord, they're going to have perspectives that are involved in that, looking at that. And because there is, then that when you assess that, your students have to be able to look at that thing from multiple perspectives, or at least from two sides. So if that's what they're going to look at it from, then you have to know that when you unpack that standard, you recognize and you plan for those perspectives and the sources that your students are going to use to look at those. So absolutely. I like how you said that, Dustin. So why do we break down the standard? And this goes to everything you guys said, to build a shared understanding, of grade level, like it says here, and most importantly, understanding those progressions. This is why those vertical PLCs are going to be so important, understanding how we work with each other in that. Begin to map the expectations. Again, going back to what you said just a second ago. Identify gaps and overlaps. This is really big. I want to tell you right now, and this pains me to say this, because I love President's Day. Let's see, what's another great holiday that Veterans Day and Constitution Day don't really apply because people tend to do that differently. But think of those holidays that we sometimes celebrate, especially in elementary school, that everybody celebrates it. And so everybody makes on President's Day an Abe Lincoln hat, a stovepipe hat, and they decorate it and this whole kind of thing, and we're learning about the presidents. You're doing an art project. What are you doing to support that learning about that president? If you're just making a stovepipe hat and reading a couple of stories about Abe, that's it. Did y'all hear what he said? He said it's like it's the social studies version of building a volcano in science. Yes, it is. It just happens, But what we've got to do, so now that's why I say, when we look back at this and we look at those moments to teach moments, in our history, like talking about our presidents and that kind of thing, let's be real intentional, especially looking at our grade focus. Let's be really intentional how we bring those moments in. And let's look at those learning progressions. Let's look at, you all saw second grade there. Man, can you imagine second grade now and having President's Day? And they should have President's Day in second grade. Most definitely. At what moment do instead of looking at the president in first grade, look at the role of the governor, because he's our leader for the state. So that's what I'm saying. So you take moments like that and you teach them, but you teach them through our grade focus, and most importantly, are using evidence and communicating conclusion standards. You teach it through those. Then you identify and prioritize gaps that exist and consider available curriculum, and you create a plan of action to implement. That's your all's goal in all of this. So this is the components that we're going to look at within the standards. We need to know what the kids know. So that refers to the facts, dates, places, like it says here, people, definitions, understand. So, what do the students have to understand? That's the big ideas. And what do they have to be able to do? You're going to see do a whole lot within our standards. So you guys got some quotes here that you guys can look over these I really want you guys to get into the deconstruct. So that's why I'm tending to kind of go through these things very quickly. But like, what does it mean to unpack? As you guys see here, breaking a standard into smaller, more explicit chunks, like Lacey was talking about just a second ago. You have to really, for example, you have to analyze the verb in the statement. As I mentioned, if it says understand the development of important community traditions and events, what does it mean to understand in that standard? That's why we have to look at that DOK. Does it mean make meaning of or transfer? So that now we're really getting into those skills within the DOK. So let's go through and look at these. So as we unpack the standards, we're going to ask a series of questions. And so you guys are going to see this. And this is one of my favorite things to do now in these trainings. I love unpacking the standards. So get ready. So let's go ahead and say, make sure you're at kystandards.org. You guys are. Make sure you go within your participant folder, and you have the Excel sheet that is also now a Google Doc, and you guys will see it there. It's the deconstructing standard instrument. So these are things that we're going to consider as we do this. What knowledge will students need to demonstrate the intended learning? What understandings will they need to master? What skills will they need to apply? And how might students demonstrate the requisite skills through learning experiences? So that being said, we're going to put all of this together. So what we're going to look at is we're going to look at the language of the standard. We're going to determine the level of rigor. And we're going to analyze and translate to better incorporate into the curriculum. And as it says here, analysis is essential at the local level because that's going to help you guys look at curriculum. So I want everybody, so you guys are looking at this. So here's how it works out into this document. So we've got the standard we're going to put in the first one. The second step is when we look at the knowledge, concepts, and vocabulary. You have seen variations of this document, if not this document, many times. Then we're going to look at the skill, and then we're going to talk about what level of proficiency. So walking you guys through what this looks like in first grade. So those of you that had the K-8 standards in front of you, like you're mostly focusing on K-8, go ahead and actually everyone go to first grade standards. And I think first grade starts on page, oh my gosh, is it 36? 36? That's scary that was in my, okay. So go to page 36 in your standards. Now scroll to the end of first grade and find the disciplinary clarifications. Go to those. So scroll on to the end. And go ahead and go to the light blue in first grade because you're going to need the light blue. So we're going to do this deconstruct side by side with this really important document. Also in your folder, you should have DOK for social studies. Can you go ahead and open that up? Because you're going to need that in just a second. In your participant folder, it says DOK for social studies. Virtual world, if I'm like running through these really fast because there may be like a delay or something, just tell me to slow down. Okay, so you've got everything open. So we're going to use KDE's example that they always use to teach people how to deconstruct. And they use this first grade standard. So in this standard, it says, identify the rights and responsibilities of citizens. I don't know about you all, but I know adults who can't do this, okay? But first graders can do this, and this is great. So here we go. So identify the rights and responsibilities of citizens. So let's just brainstorm this out loud. And that also includes the virtual world. So if you guys would, tell me what knowledge, concepts, vocabulary you think the students would need to know to reach this standard. So we know right off the bat that they're going to have to know what is. Rights and responsibilities. So we know that. Looking at it, what else is something they would need to know? What is a citizen? Absolutely. How to identify what? What those are, what the rights and responsibilities are? Yeah. So we know it's rights and responsibilities of citizens. Now what I want you guys to do, in the disciplinary clarifications you guys are looking at, go to 1CRR1. And now, look over for about 30 seconds and then start yelling it out at me. What do they really need to have? 1CRR1. Okay, 15 seconds. 10 seconds. 9, 8. Okay, here we go. So what are some other things they need to know? Yell them out. We know rights and responsibilities. What else do they need according to that clarification statement? Wait, I heard it back here. What was it? Democracy. They need to know what a democracy is. Freedom of speech. What are taxes? Yep, what it means to serve on a jury. So look what I did. Look what happened up here. So we know now that so this tells you the lens with which to teach it. Because now listen, we could teach rights and responsibilities for 2 weeks. We would have the kids, saying being responsible for other people and what that look. You got to remember, this is first grade. So we're going to focus on, like it says up here, and that's why that clarification statement is so important. We're going to focus on 3 rights and 2 responsibilities. We're going to focus on the right to an education because we want them to pick up on that because they're sitting in a public education classroom. We want them to think about the right to vote because that's something they see pretty often, hopefully. They see their parents. My husband and I used to take our daughter all the time when we went voting because it was so important to me. I wanted every time we were in that, that booth or we were at that table really now electronically, we would take her and we had to stop in kindergarten because she could read and she went to school and told people who we voted for. So we had to stop taking her. We said, you can stay on that side, just watch me. So then we have the right to vote. We have freedom of speech. We can help our students. I mean, that's one whole day's, that's one of those things that you can bring into the classroom, bringing in examples of it and asking students to really develop understanding around what it means to have that freedom of speech. The responsibility to pay taxes and the responsibility to serve on a jury. So now you guys go ahead. You see that it's identify is the skill level because we're going to identify the skill. Now, what I want you guys to do is to go into that DOK for social studies. You as a table, again, you have 30 seconds to do this. Go into DOK for social studies and tell me what level of proficiency these students need to do this. Ready? 30 seconds. So what level of proficiency according to the DOK? Oh, well, somebody's already put this in the chat.
Okay, so Letcher County did share.
Okay.
They said a 1.
A 1. And they are correct. Now it's not going. Great. Tanner, can you come fix this, please? It is level 1. So as it says up here, one way to determine answers to this question is to look at the DOK. I guided you guys there before. So think, first grade, level 1. Why? Okay, it's just identifying, because notice how they listed in that. And what did you guys say? Yeah, it's just recall because this is first grade. This is foundational learning. It is foundational. It's not going to be anything that, they're going to have to leave there and do some kind of big dissertation or big presentation. So now what I want you guys to do, so this would be, Johnny, if you want to yell it to Jacob, this would be a good chance for us to go out into breakout rooms. You guys in here, we'll do this in your groups. So virtual world, we're going to go into breakout rooms and let you guys deconstruct 5HCO1. Now that you have the skills, now that you know what this looks like. So ready? So let me know when you guys go to the breakout. So remember, you're going to use the depth of knowledge for social studies, the CSS, and you're also going to be using the disciplinary clarifications. So the good news is you're in the main standards document because this is not a high school standard. All right. Okay, guys, rooms should be coming back now, so we're ready. So let's look at this. So this is analyze the role conflict and collaboration played in the founding of the United States. So what knowledge, concepts, vocabulary, because I remember you guys were supposed to go into the disciplinary clarifications, right? So you guys went there, on your own. So let's look at that. So just generally looking at this, what do the kids need to know? Because I remember this is 5th grade. Think 5th grade focus. So what are some of the things that we need there for this one? Founding documents. And so for 5th grade, what founding documents would they need for 5th grade? Think their focus. Declaration of Independence. Constitution, even though they end the year with that. Yes, preamble to the Constitution. What else? Huh? Mayflower Compact. Yes. Okay. She was like, no. Okay, so those may be some of the things. Yeah. So those would be some of the things that we would need to understand. But now let's look at conflict and collaboration. So what did your disciplinary clarifications put in there? Okay, debate. Compromise. What are examples of compromise that our students are going to be talking about in 5th grade? Think grade focus. Stay focused on that. So they're going to be aware of what compromise? The great compromise, which is the compromise between what two plans? Virginia, New Jersey plan, okay? So it's a compromise between those two. What is the conflict? What's another big because notice here how it says the founding of the United States. See, there's other documents actually that we can bring into this. You can actually bring in the Fundamental Orders of Connecticut because that goes back to the founding of Connecticut. They can also go back and look, because again, it's 5th grade. They have to talk about Pennsylvania. They have to talk about the agreement between William Penn and the American Indians that were there, and the agreements that there's all kinds. Now, I don't say they have to go over these, but those are all kinds of ways to bring in conflict and collaboration. Conflict is over the conflict of slavery. That would be one thing to talk about with your 5th grade students, getting them to start thinking about that's a moment when we conflicted, but how did we collaborate? And we collaborate with 3/5 compromise and with other agreements that happens in the Constitutional Convention. So you guys put all sorts of stuff on there. What is this thing doing? Oh, let me go back. Now, what skills do your students need? So what is the verb there? So it's going to analyze. So now let's look at that DOK. Considering what all they have to use to do that with, let's see if we can get agreement here. So what did Pikeville say was the DOK? And Pikeville Independent, what did they say was the DOK there?
Pikeville Independent said that DOK 3.
DOK 3. Would you all agree with DOK 3? Yes, because you look at what they have to do with that document, the things that they have to manipulate, that they have to be able to use and to back, and to corroborate and contextualize and everything. So that would be definitely. Now let's look at this next one. Okay, we're going to do this one out loud because it's big. So go ahead and put this one in on your document. You can cut and paste this one. This is from 7th grade. So where's my middle school teacher? That's you. Oh, hey. So anyway, so ready? Cut and paste 7.I.Q.2 into your document. And I'll give you a second to do that. And notice I'm saying cut and paste because look how long it is. See, we're getting in that progression. Notice how 1st grade looked pretty easy. 5th grade was a little bit tougher. Now, oh my gosh, look at 7th grade. So 7.I, which tells you that it is a inquiry standard. Remember, we had to deconstruct those two. 7.I.Q.2 generates supporting questions using the disciplines of social studies to help answer compelling questions related to the growth and expansion of civilizations between 600 and 1600. Oh boy. So right, and notice how it says using the disciplines of social studies. So we're going to break this down because guess what? The inquiry standards are not in the disciplinary clarifications. This is totally and completely up to you guys as a team. So let's break this one down. So ready? So we know we're going to look at generate later, so we're going to come back to that. So supporting questions, we know that's going to be knowledge or a skill or knowledge of vocabulary rather that the students have to have. So let's jot down supporting questions. Notice how this one just focuses on supporting questions initially. Now, using the disciplines of social studies, what do we write down next? What skill do the students need to have? They need to understand the kind of questions that people ask in economics, the kind of questions they ask in civics, the kind of questions they ask in geography and in history. So they need to understand the approach or the focus of the 4 disciplines. So I'll give you guys a minute to jot that down or type it in. Yes, Dustin.
A lot of these same things when we're unpacking are going to be found at multiple grade levels.
Yes, they are.
So like, you wouldn't say you have to know what a supporting question is. You have to know what a compelling question is because they would have hit that 5 years before this.
Ideally, yes.
So, you know what I'm saying? Like,
I do.
how do you suggest when we go back to district that we vertically align so that we don't have people teaching the same thing over and over?
By 7th grade, you should be practicing it second nature by 7th grade. But that's not going to happen for a little while, is it? So I think that you have to very intentionally sit down because obviously, okay, and here's something else for you guys to see as well. And this was how it was explained to me. Up until 5th grade, the teacher does the bulk of the work for questioning. Okay? Up until 5th grade. After 5th grade, it's what they do with the questioning standard that makes a difference, and that is the expectation is that the students do it. That's why this verb says generate. That's why 1st grade said ask compelling questions about their community. That's their only questioning standard. So looking at the intent of the skill is what really happens in that alignment. Okay, so what you're going to do with 7th grade is you're going to say, what skills are we going to teach our students to generate their own questions, to generate supporting questions? Well, you know, what am I going to say? It's Kim Surgent. What am I going to say right off the bat? QFT. Yes, sing along. There we go. I'm going to say QFT, but I'm also going to know that there has to be other protocols. Like if I were a teacher, I would have a nice little toolkit of about 4 or 5 different ways to get my kids to generate their own supporting questions, because that's the expectation. So in a lot of ways, Dustin, it's not just teaching what a compelling, because really, to be honest with you, like getting back to this 3rd grade teacher, that in this one district, her kids already understand compelling and supporting question because she's been using it now for 4 or 5 months. Her students understand that. So it's not teaching that, but it's what you do with it. So in the case of 7th graders, this is getting pretty deep. These 7th graders not only have to generate their own, but they have to think of a question they need to ask that has an economic focus. They have to ask a question that has a civics focus, that has, and I'm looking around the room at some of the middle school people. I'm making eye contact with them, and geography and history. So they're looking at those focuses for those disciplines. So it's not that you're just getting them to understand what a compelling and supporting question is. You're getting them to look at them differently. Yeah. The unpacking, right. Conflict.
Yeah, the year previous to that and the year previous to that both reference that too.
Yes.
So I was just making sure
Yes.
that we don't have a big overlap when we
Right.
go back to do that.
And it's not entirely bad to have some overlap, because let's just say it out loud. I mean, last year and this year, so creating, having, a little overlap is not bad, but a whole lot is redundant. So you have to just, do that very carefully. So in this case, they would have to understand the kinds of questions that historians, economists, political scientists, and geographers ask. So how are you, think of how you're going to get your students to understand what that looks like. So let's look at the next part. And I heard this table up here mention it right off the bat. What is something else that your students need to know? And I'm going to pick on this Knott County table because there's like 3 or 4. This Knott County table, what did you all say about the last part of this standard?
These questioning standards, like we start using them on day 1, and we use them every day. It's
Every day.
not like a math standard where, okay, we teach it for a week, we master it, we test. Social studies standards are different. And so you're going to use the same standards over and over. And so,
Especially with inquiry.
Yeah, this is 1,000 years worth of stuff we've got to try to unpack.
Yeah.
So,
So it's 600 to 1600. So your students need to understand what the concept of growth and expansion of civilizations between 600 and 1600 is. So now we've done the first 2. And I've kind of already told you. So let's look at generate. So we're going to put generate in on that 3rd column. But now I want you guys to go to the DOK, and I'm going to let you all make the decision here. Considering everything that's involved in this, think big. What DOK is this? 45 seconds at your tables, talk about it. So what DOK did you guys say that this one was? Okay, we got people saying 3. Do we have any other suggestions? Oh, we've got one table that's saying 4. Tell me why. Tell me why you're saying 4. And look at that DOK sheet while you do it.
That's where I'm at. Connecting and relating ideas and concepts within the content area or among content areas. So within the information over the disciplines of social studies, and they're looking at generating questions from compelling questions. There's a lot of information they're having to discern from that.
And there's also, yes, and here's the thing, it's an actionable product that they're going to have. They're going to be using their questions. So I have no, and you're going to start out at, definitely a DOK 3, aren't you? Ideally, with 7th graders early in the year, but you're going to build up to that DOK 4, to where you're going to look at them and say, guys, here's what we're studying, here's what we're looking at, here's my compelling question, but we need to generate, some supporting questions. So I need you all to do that. And we need questions from economics, civics, geography, and history. So can I give you five, and you just look at them and say, can I give you 5 minutes? What protocol would you like to use? You can even look at them and say, what protocol would you like? Can you see if this is something that you're doing in March, what you've got to be doing? So we can unpack it even further and go back to September and October. What are you doing in September and October? Because you guys, if you will look, this is 7.I.Q.2. You should look at 3. If you think 2, is tough, look at its big brother, which is 0.3. So this is why we have to be so, and Lacey, I'm so glad, and thank you for bringing that up, is that you're going to see these standards over and over every single day, every day. Just like you're going to see the using evidence standards, every day. So that being said, what I want you guys to do, so with your partner there, so did you have any aha moments, or is there things that you still wonder about having unpacked inquiry standards and disciplinary strand standards? 1 minute, talk to your neighbors, go. So this is why I love what I do. We had an epiphany. Knott County, a teacher from Knott County had an epiphany. So Johnny, go ahead and take that microphone and make sure those batteries are good, because she's going to need them. So we've had a teacher. So I'm going to tell you guys what it's taken. And now, Knott County, I have been working with some. So they've been thinking about these standards a little bit different. So here we go. Ready? So Lacey, would you please tell us your aha moment? And then you were wondering, and we took it to an aha moment. Go ahead.
Okay, first of all, I feel like I've talked more than anybody in this room.
You can never out-talk me, honey. Go ahead.
Well, anyway, so looking at these questioning standards for and I teach 7th grade, and I just had never noticed this before. So I asked him, the third questioning standard for 7th grade says compare the types of supporting questions. And okay. Compare the types of supporting questions each of the social studies disciplines uses to answer compelling and supporting questions. So my question to Kim is, what are the different types? Because I guess I had not really paid attention, and I wanted to make sure I understood that. But Kim, do you want to answer that, or do you want me to? The way she answered it as far as types is your supporting question, is it a civics question? Is it an economics question? A historical question? So it breaks down into the disciplines that way. So the types of supporting questions, I had never noticed that before. But
then tell them the example, because she went straight to an example. Oh, when I do this in the classroom, this is what that would look like. And y'all, she did a little lesson plan right in front of me in about 20 seconds. Say the rest of it. Say it.
Okay, so I do QFT. Kim actually came into my classroom a couple of years ago and showed me how to do QFT. But I asked her, like, at the end of my QFT, could I go a step farther and say, maybe have the students organize their questions into the different disciplines. And
I said yes, because now when I do QFT with, I've been doing that with some districts, and what I do is when they get those questions developed, I'll say, now go put an E beside your economics questions, a G beside your geographic, that kind of thing, and we extend that and get those kids thinking like that. And she did not know that, and she said that. So that tells you where this stuff is going, which is great. And Pikeville or Pike County, go right ahead.
Okay, I'll go for Pike County first. They wanted me to share that they are. It was like an aha to really dive into the vocabulary, and I agreed with them 100% because we believe in explicit embedded vocabulary instruction in everything we do with specially designed instruction. So that brings my side of it into it just a little bit, and so I agreed with that. And then looking at the concepts and what the individual concepts are that have to be taught.
So I kind of wanted to go around. So let's say Jackson. Can I pick on y'all next? Jackson Independent. What was your aha, your wonderings about? And here he comes. Johnny's running. So hold on.
Well, I said for me is I don't really do social studies, so all of it was aha moments to me. But the aha moments that we kind of talked about were just the DOK, that part where you could kind of like find specifically what you needed, and then I just love the QFT thing with breaking it down to those questions. I never had considered that, but that's a great strategy too, because I do love QFT, but not. And what we still wonder about, what about you guys? Because you don't know what you don't know. I'm not really social studies. So was there anything you guys are still? What did you all say you were still wondering about?
And don't be afraid. There's no judgment, because
Well,
remember,
they're talking about the curriculum connections, and we're just kind of creating that from scratch. Well, yeah, and
especially for K3. Yeah. Okay, awesome. Thank you so much. And while you're back there, Johnny, let's just go on over to hazard. We'll just go over there real quick.
So I guess I'll start out with a wondering question. I mean, one thing that we talked about, and I feel that this has been kind of a common theme, but it's just how can we best support our elementary school teachers throughout this whole process? And, that's like, 2 of the 3 people here at our table, we do high school, and then we have 1 middle school person. But just thinking back to some of those standards, it's like, I think one of the standards was like 1st or 2nd grade, distinguish between primary and secondary sources. Second. And was that also the grade where it's like, understand Kentucky laws and how Kentucky laws work? And, it's just like, wow. I mean, when I think back to when I was in 2nd grade, I sure couldn't do that, which, I mean, it's been a while. And so, and, again, I don't do elementary school, but I'm just thinking, I'm sure that we're going to have elementary school teachers with questions, and we're going to have to think about, how can we best, support them in, helping them meet these standards.
Absolutely. So do I have, I've got an elementary table back here, and I've got some folks who work with elementary, a whole big bunch, and I've got some elementary folks up here. So do any of you guys have ideas that you're already generating, that you're thinking, well, this is what we're going to do? We're actually, that's the next step that we're talking about doing, that we're already planning into that. So I think that if any of you guys want to jump in, just yell at me, raise your hands. But I think the big thing that we have to do because, okay, here's the thing with K-5 folks. They have pedagogy all day long. If you want to know how to teach something, go to them and say, we need you to teach students how to develop a claim. They're all over it. They got the pedagogy. They got the skill in that. What do they not have? Yeah. Well, they don't have content sometimes, because they don't know. They're not a social studies major like those middle school. Like middle school is, some folks call it the best of both worlds, because they have the pedagogy and they have the content. And then high school just, mostly have the content. Let's just say that out loud. All of us high school people, let's just look at each other and kind of nod. We know. So, that kind of thing. So when you start thinking about, elementary folks, they need, I want to say content. I don't want to just say curriculum, because that's a local thing, but they need to understand what it is they teach. So if you're going to help them, get them into their overviews, get them to really understand their focus. I think the biggest thing for me when I work with K-3 people and they realize that 1st grade is mostly Kentucky and just a little bit of local, you see their shoulders actually go down, because they come in like this. And by the time I finish talking, their shoulders are down here like this. 3rd grade is still most daunting, because they feel like it's the whole world. But when they realize they show how people interact globally, that helps them kind of see the focus of that. So going into their overviews and really focusing on how they approach the social studies and keeping it tight within that, then you can start to help them find resources, high quality instructional resources. And some of them are out there that you can help them, in teaching that. But I think that's the big thing that we need to do. When you look at grade 2 and you see they're using evidence, they need support terribly. So, and there you can actually teach them those skills. You can say, okay, now you don't do this. You have the other pedagogy. Now let me show you this pedagogy, what that looks like. And you can play around with that. Absolutely. Floyd County, anything you all like to share? And Perry County, haven't forgotten.
Yes.
I'm looking at you.
We've actually had quite a few aha moments throughout the day. As you know, we've been working on developing our own district curriculum, and we've had a lot of teachers involved in that process. So being a fairly large district, the big aha for us is first, drilling down and finding out where each of our schools are and beginning with that school leader as far as their understanding. So we feel like the organizational tools that we've gotten today are going to help us with that process. We've got 3 principals with us and 3 instructional supervisors today. So we've actually actually spend a lot of our time thinking, where are we in that curriculum? And how can we best utilize the people that know the most in our schools? First of all, knowing who that is, drilling it down, using them as an asset and a resource to move it forward. So we've got a lot of AHA, and we love the organizational tool that you have, and we probably will use it verbatim when we go back to the district.
Absolutely. Let's go to the virtual school people for a moment there. Does Menifee, Martin Lawrence? Oh, awesome. Jenkins, what's Jenkins going to do?
Okay, hold on just a second. Okay, the first thing that they said that one of their aha moments were the importance of the depth of knowledge, to focus in on that. Also, how students need to reach that higher level thinking to push toward that. Also, they had noted that some of the standards are skills that are similar to the reading and writing standards that they're taught all year long. I think somebody had referenced earlier about them, being different than math. And the last thing was that they wanted to focus on breaking down the standards to make sure that they're teaching the intent, to make sure they get those skills needed for the students.
Awesome. And Letcher County?
Okay, I have a couple things to share from Letcher County, and the first thing was that they just talked about the value, and they referenced that, excuse me, the great value, and so the social studies teachers breaking down the standards so that they understood the content, and then were able to really pick out that particular skill that was needed for that standard or skills. And then the other thing is that the discussion around what students need to know, or how deep their knowledge needs to be and down into the content. So it's really digging in deep into the content and really knowing what skills and what kids needed to know. And it's back again referencing that depth of knowledge and really, understanding that as a teacher and how we get students to that level.
Yes. And I think really, that's why I say every time I deconstruct standards with teachers, you see the lights come on. Truly. And that's the big moments. Is there any other district that would like to, because I know we have several tables of, so Leslie, so you guys are thinking about. It should be on.
We've just been talking about how best to do all this, that we need to have curriculum days where we can align vertically and horizontally, have our kindergarten teachers working together, our fifth grade teachers working together, and do it vertically as well. So
awesome.
Just trying to figure out the time.
So what we're going to do right now, so what you guys will see here, and we're pulling, yep, that's it right there. We're pulling up this slide. So guess what? Merry Christmas is all we're saying. So what we're going to do right now, and you can go ahead and, there you go. He's making it bigger. Here is the slide that you guys need. So what we want you to do is to go into this slide. You guys can see it right here. Is the thing in the? It's slide 85. Okay, slide 85. And what we want you to do as a team, and what we can do, and I've got some of these up here. So if you could take out, should we give them these? Could we give them some of this to plan? No. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's true. Just get out a big old piece of paper. So what we would love for you guys to do is to put your goal and your objectives. And so this is why we had you guys take a moment to really talk into the aha and the wonderings, because you guys will see your ahas are going to be your goals, your objectives, and we really want you to start thinking about what strategy. 2 different groups in here today have already said that what they want to do is to have multiple days. So start already thinking about that. So what is going to be your strategy? You're going to break this up into pieces. Are you going to go into the elementary schools first and then the middle schools? And I'm going to shut up because I don't want to tell you what to write. So look at a timeline when you're going to do those. Persons responsible, expected impact, but additional supports. That's getting into that part. And so what we would love for you guys to do is to take about 15 minutes because we want you to do this with us here because we want to come through and support you in the writing of that. So for some of you all, if you do not have an administrator with you, and we may have a few districts that don't, guess what you can do? You can create that plan, and then you can take it back to propose it to them and to look at that. So ready, 15 minutes, and then we're going to start looking at shutting down the shop.
Hey, Kim, we missed a comment earlier that we'd like to add.
Oh my gosh, yes. We got a comment, Mrs. So sorry.
This is Johnson County, and they said their AHA was focusing on the grade level themes will assist teachers on breaking down standards. The clarification statements and vocabulary are valuable for new teacher learners.
And so that you just heard the little thing go off. So let's talk about these documents you guys have had the opportunity to create. I've got some slides here to walk you all through, to support you all in thinking around that. Thank you. I'm going to go around and talk a little bit. So what I want to do first is I want to open it up. Let me go back here for a second because we're going to talk about next steps in a minute. So I want to open it up to the virtual rooms and let you guys kind of talk to us a little bit. Who would like to kind of share some of your plans and now that you've created a timeline and looked at additional supports? What are you guys thinking? In the experience of intentionally planning and having a document to plan into, now that you've seen all the components that you need to look at, what kind of insight has that given you into creating a plan to disseminate the social studies standards with your districts and everything? Looking at it through a document. So like it says here, these are the things that you guys did as a group, set expectations and assigned tasks. That's kind of where you guys have been. So while you guys are thinking about that, wait, let me go back some actually. I skipped those slides, my bad. So as you guys do this, one thing you all need to look at in that breakdown, took me 3 times to say it correctly, in breaking down the standards document, there's one category there, one column that says, is this standard being taught? If not addressed, is it being taught somewhere else? And then, of course, on the other side there it says, comments, thoughts, that kind of thing. So what you guys kind of did, or what you've been looking at, especially that document we're working on right now, is you're kind of saying, okay, this is our plan to get these standards out to our teachers, and this is our goal and everything. But you have a document that's going to support you in that. And especially for a couple of tables that I talked to you guys, and for the 4th or 5th time today, we're talking about the K-3 component, that folks are trying to get that, get standards into those levels. So in doing that, this is one place that will give you some leverage. If not addressed, is it being taught somewhere else? But most importantly, is this standard being taught? So when you start looking at some of those K-3 standards, they are not being taught. So now, that's a point to really get into that bigger discussion with instructional supervisors and principals and everything, and start having those big conversations. But this was a conversation I had at a couple of tables that I thought was really important. So as you guys start going through and looking at these gaps and you start creating this plan to bring people together, conversations that need to be had will look like this. Like, for instance, one of the conversations, like, first and foremost, get your grade level PLC together. And for some of you guys, because you're smaller districts, but you have several schools, that means you're going to give your kindergarten teachers in your district the opportunity to talk to each other. Like, that was one thing, that's one goal for, one of the tables that are in here, I know. They want to be able to create a district-wide PLC for a grade level and give them the opportunity to talk. If you have multiple teachers who teach this, obviously you're going to have your school talk, and then you're hopefully going to move that out to the district. So those questions that they're going to address is, what is not being taught? Do you really need to cover it in this grade? My only issue with question number 2 in this is that if you're looking at K-3 and you're looking at your standards, then they need to be taught for that. There's not really another time that it can be taught. Not for the 5th grade test especially. Because for that 5th grade assessment, that's their only experience with Kentucky studies Kentucky is in, or full experience is in 1st grade. Their only real experience in looking at the global connections is in 3rd grade. That's their only chance to get to that. So this is why 5th grade teachers can no longer play catch up. For the longest time, for decades, our 5th grade teachers have played catch up on a 3-5 grade banded assessment, and it cannot happen. So what might be some areas where you currently spend too much time? And guys, here's something I want to talk about a little bit. Sometimes you have those I know you guys are familiar with Cult of Pedagogy, the podcast. She also does a blog. She's phenomenal. If you haven't, her name's Jennifer. Thank you, Jennifer Gonzalez. I knew that name was going to be there in a minute. She is phenomenal, and I love her podcast, and I listen, to it coming to and from work. And she has this one based on the Grecian urn, this whole idea that we have that one lesson that we love, we adore, and we keep teaching it, even though maybe our standards will change. And I'm really, changing up her whole blog and everything. But I heard a speaker the other day, and I can't remember where it was now, it'll come to me, but they said when we look at our standards, we have to be very intentional to make sure that we're teaching them what they need to know, not what is neat to know. And I think that is so important. And that's what I think about when I look at number 3. I could give you examples, but I will not. But, teaching high school, kids would come in and they would have phenomenal knowledge of this. And you could really see places where teachers were really teaching something that they were strong in and that they loved, and you want them to be able to do that. But if our standards change and those things are no longer there, we have to be willing to, I joked around with the 5th grade teacher when these standards first came out, and she was very upset about the Civil War. And I made a joke that I was tempted to take a shoebox and make it look like a coffin. And whenever I went to trainings, whenever teachers were saying, oh my gosh, I don't get to teach this anymore, I was going to get them to put it on a little piece of paper and put it in my little coffin box, and we were going to bury it at the end of the training so we could let it go, kind of thing. So we have to start thinking about that. And are there areas to go much deeper? And especially when you start looking at the 2nd grade content, how much do we know about Mexico? That's going to be someplace we really need to go deep into. Then you need to give them the opportunity to look at multiple grades. Like it says here, social studies across multiple grades. Your PLCs, and again, a table was talking about this, having their K1, K1 PLC, 2, 3 PLC. Yes. Thank you.
If it's appropriate, now I have.
Yes, it is.
Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about Letcher County's plan. So if that's okay, I'll go ahead and share with you the information they shared. So right now, they're currently looking at their instructional resources, to how they are aligning with the standards. So they're really evaluating and looking at those instructional resources. The next step is that they're going to go through that curriculum document over the summer. So they're going to revisit the document that they currently have around social studies standards. So as they look and analyze those instructional resources and strategies, as they learn that information, then they're going to apply that to their mapping and their document. And then so they're also they're beginning a district PLC group for the middle school social studies teachers, and they think particularly about that when that social studies teacher may be the only teacher in the building. So they're going to create that district-wide PLC, and then they plan to scale up with that with the other grade levels as that works out for them. And then at the school level, they're going to go ahead and start sharing today's information immediately with at the building level, because they have all their principals participating in today's training. So they're going to take that immediately back. So they've got that immediate plan, and then they're looking at those resources, and then they're going to revisit their map, but they're also then concurrently having those PLCs for those particular grade bands.
That's great. That's awesome. And Jennifer?
I had someone to send me a private message, and what they're talking about is that they really need to sit down and they need to find time. They said they really need to find the time for their teachers to work with these standards and work with each other. Mm-hmm. They said that they have done some initial training around the standards, but they realize that their teachers need much more time to really get that in-depth knowledge, and they think that that's priority number 1. So I just wanted to share that.
Absolutely. No, it is.
I am interacting over here.
Getting to this, when you look at this, I think given, K1, 2, 3, the opportunity, because, sometimes, especially when you start thinking about first grade is still teaching the rules and stuff like that in community, just like kindergarten is, but then they're going to approach it to a state perspective. But there are people in that building who have resources that your teachers have and that your teachers need, especially in those elementary schools. So that's one reason why it's important to bring all those conversations together. So you guys can see these basic questions here, and then let's go to, and then like it says here, looking at social studies across other content areas. So, and some of you guys were already telling me that you already do this. Like you have all of 2nd grade, that meets together. So, it's science, reading, the whole thing, all of them meet together. So these are questions here that they can use to really engage in those deeper conversations, to really look deeply within the standards. I want to talk about this really fast, but before I do, I want to say something because I think, So one thing I want to say that's kind of come to my attention, I've talked to a couple of districts about this, is that it's not now, it is later. But one thing I think that is so powerful about principals being part of this process is that you guys as teachers and administrators in here now know that instruction is different, is very different. And because it is, when we have walkthroughs now, that is going to look very different. And because it is, we need principals understanding now that when they walk into the room, you don't look to the front of the room for the energy and for the learning. You look to the rest of the room. If you walk in and you see that teacher at the front of the room all the time, then you're going to have some larger conversations, okay? Because the energy is where the students are. That's where the learning is. Finally, social studies has caught up with everyone else and said, you know what? It's not the teacher doing all the learning and all the work. It's the students. So now that energy has converted to the outer, into the room itself. And so we have to really be aware of that. So it's wonderful that administrators, that principals are part of this conversation. I mean, that is absolutely phenomenal.
Kim,
yes.
can I add something to that? I have done some certified evaluation update training with districts over the course since July. And something that districts are looking to, schools are looking at, is how they can use video observations for teacher observations, so that you can take teachers who, I'm not talking about new teachers who need a lot of support, but I'm talking about teachers who are, kind of well established in their role. And so maybe think about principals and district administrators, think about this as we are launching into this standards work, and these standards are so new for everyone. Maybe you get some of your social studies teachers to volunteer for some video observations, and they video themselves teaching some of these social studies lessons that look like this, and capture that on video. They sit down with you and explain what you're seeing in the video. This is how this looks. This is why I'm doing this. Here's how it connects to the standards. Here's the alignment. Let them share that with you. And then you have some video models of what this instructional shift looks like that you can share with other teachers. So that's just something to think about. It kind of takes away that pressure of a single walkthrough that a principal might do. A teacher can plan that lesson, deliver that lesson, video it, and then you would have that ongoing evidence and artifact to share with other teachers.
That is, yeah. So this is too exciting. I know you guys are tired. So we're going to finish. And speaking of videos, I have a little video to share with you guys at the end. I like to think of it as my inquiry propaganda, but I'll show it to you here in just a second. So some of the do's. So like I said, work in different groupings of educators. Incredibly important to seek out and understand why gaps and overlaps exist. Think about the whole experience of the student across grade and content areas. Had this conversation with you all the other day because 5th grade and 8th grade share the American Revolution and the Road to Revolution and the Constitution. They cannot do the same lessons in each of those grades. They've got one grade is an introduction to it, the other grade is deeper thinking about it. So they can't do the same activities and things like that. They have to think bigger about that. Do not think of the standards as a checklist of topics. Okay, and don't hold too tight to activities and lessons like we've talked about that we kind of have to let go of. So what would an ideal standards aligned curriculum look like for your classroom and your school? This is something that already you guys, so if you guys would just take about 1 minute, talk at your table. This is one of our last conversations, talk in your virtual rooms. So, what would an ideal standards aligned curriculum look like for your classroom or school? Talk about that, jot it down, 1 minute, go. Would anybody like to share what that dream is of that standards aligned curriculum? Thinking about our social studies standards, what that looks like. Would anyone like to share that? Say it's the beautiful world of inquiry. Students are smiling. Lessons are rigorous. All sorts of stuff. So you guys can see here's some other, you guys have this PowerPoint, and I'm kind of hurrying through this last little bit because we want to show you the video, plus you guys have to have time to do the feedback survey. So here's some other things to consider putting in your plan, okay? So when you want to start addressing those gaps, we gave you the one district planning. That's to talk about how to put out your trainings and everything, how to create that timeline. But here's some other things for you guys to start looking at when that timeline grows, when that district plan grows. Now we're going to start looking at gaps and really planning to address those, talking about the materials and there's going to be, and I will tell you guys this, another quote, and this may be one to write down to remember to tell your teachers, and I have encountered this in other districts. Inquiry does two things. Okay? Inquiry identifies gaps in the knowledge of, inquiry identifies gap in skills for students and gaps in content for teachers. It does that. Inquiry identifies, and I can show you guys the blog where I read that, identifies gaps in student skill. This is why your all students are struggling sometimes. Those of you who've been trying to implement this. This is why they're completely freaked out. How many times have they looked at you and said, just tell me the answer. Just tell me the answer. And they've looked at you, don't, stop it. Stop it now. Don't start it. So if you haven't started it, don't. And this is why we as teachers are just like, oh my gosh, I cannot do this. This is ridiculous. It's because we have that gap in our own content knowledge, especially when you guys think about those grades, and we talked about it earlier, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 6th, 7th, when we start looking at those. So those are things to consider. So also what you have in your toolkit, we have a grade 3. So this is actually looking at to address the gaps. This is something that you guys can come back and talk about. And we went through this one. And so our next steps. So you guys have already kind of done this, what needs to happen between now and the spring to ensure alignment with the CAS for social studies. You guys are already looking at that. Then the bigger question here on this one is what needs to happen between summer 2022 and spring 2023. Some of you guys are already looking at the summer, and you told me that. You've even said, I'd like to work with you this summer. So this is something else for us to think about. So that is that extension that you guys have got, are going to be considering.